Oh, that was good stuff. Good stuff. Oh my God, that was good stuff. Good stuff. Kazawi. That was inspired. I think by the guy twirling the guy with the umbrella. They're so gay with the whole like you can't see me, I'm hiding behind an umbrella. I think that's great to throw in like inspired by the penguin. Kazawi. Whew, that was fun. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the following program. I am your host, Joe Newman, aka Good Lawgic. I hope your day was okay. It's far from a perfect day, obviously. As alas, we had the tragic news of the passing of Scott Adams, who was legendarily based. Guy was brilliant and talented and seemed to genuinely care about society, bettering society. And in that sense, he was a remarkable role model for countless people. And this is a tough day for society. This is a tough day for humanity. His passing is certainly it's tough. It's a rough day. Before I go further, I should mention that the three main topics I'm going to be covering tonight will be Scott Adams passing. Also, I'm going to be covering the certain announcements Trump made about what he's planning to do going forward, which I think you're going to like these announcements. These are it's almost like he was making brand new campaign promises when he's not even looking for our vote as to like what he's going to be doing. And it was just one great thing after another. And finally, in the case, there was a Supreme Court oral argument today in a case called Little v. Hickox, which relates to Idaho's law banning trans athletes from competing in female sports. It was challenged by Hickox, and it was argued before the Supreme Court today. I've got some clips from the oral arguments that I want to just go over with you and help you understand, because some of the legal arguments are very complicated. Like you really need to. They're very challenging for anyone who's not an attorney to digest and understand. So I want to try and break down a few of those for you. And that's related to our goal. Each night I put a goal up there of 15 super chats of $10 or more. And tonight's goal is that I will spend a minimum of an hour going through all arguments, because this is obviously an important case. Whether American states have the capacity to ban transgender women from competing in women's sports is obviously an essential thing to unraveling the corruption of our society, whereby men are treated like women and able to basically invade in every way imaginable areas that have been secured exclusively for women and for good reason. Now, and I have a lot of thoughts about women's sports in general, which I'll break down for you when we get to that topic. So, but if we hit tonight's goal, which sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. If we hit our goal, I'll give you an hour. I'm trying to break down for you. It was an hour and 45-minute, an hour and 50-minute oral argument. It wasn't a crazy long oral argument, but I'll make a serious dent in it at the very least by putting an hour of time into it if we hit tonight's goal, which we'll see what happens. That's all for you guys to ultimately decide. So with that, I want to start by talking about Scott Adams. I'm going to share with you the first time I really learned of Scott Adams. First time I knew who he was from Dilbert. And I was always a fan of Dilbert. And one of the things I thought about when I was covering this show was I was thinking about sharing, just like going through some of his comic strip work. I'm just pulling up some of his comics and reading it along. And when I was pulling some of them up, I was like, I don't think this is going to do him any justice at all, because for me, most comic strips that I read, if they're really funny, it'll make me sort of smirk. Like, my reaction is never going to be a laugh out loud at a comic strip. That just doesn't happen. It'll be like, so my reaction I almost feel as if it's going to cheapen the influence and impact that he had. So I don't want to do that, because that's not fair to the man. And I never had the privilege of interacting with him in any way, shape, or form. I'm fairly certain Scott Adams never heard of Good Lawgic, or anything of that kind. I did reach out to him once or twice, but I'm sure a lot of people reached out to him. But I will say that he told me, the first time I heard him say something was shortly after the 2020 election, which was, I thought, a very profound thing. And it was something that I was like, I never thought of that before. And everything he was saying made a great deal of sense. And he presented an argument that I had not contemplated. And I thought it was profoundly powerful in explaining, the concerns about the 2020 election, and really almost an irrefutable argument for some folks on the left or in the middle, if there is such a thing, who would claim that, no, there was no cheating, because he really disproved that notion. And that was, I think, the first time I heard him say something, I was like, wow, this guy's sharp. He's sharp. That's a very sharp argument. So because that is like the first thing that I ever heard from him that really just blew me away as to how sharp and based he was, I am going to share that with you now. And essentially his point, which I've lifted from him, I've stolen from him on occasion. Not recently, because obviously no one's talking about the 2020 election very often in 2026. But he made the following point. You spent 4 years telling us how evil and terrible Donald Trump is, comparing him to a Nazi, to Hitler, to whomever. You've just been going on and on for the last 4 years saying how terrible he was. And then in the run up to the 2020 election, you said if he's a lame duck president, he's just going to be worse. He's just going to be worse. See, if you really believe that, if that's what you really in your heart of heart think is true, he's a danger. And I think a lot of people who say it are full of crap, but I think a lot of people who say it actually believe it. I think they've been convinced of it by their TV overlords. And the point that he made was, if you really believe that, and you do not try to cheat to keep out Hitler from being in office, if you're not trying to cheat, you're a very evil person. If you had a chance, everyone always talks about like, wow, if you go back in time and kill Hitler, would you go back in time and kill him? And everyone's like, oh yeah, sure, for sure I'd kill him. For sure I would kill him. Well, this isn't killing him. This is cheating an election. So if you could steal an election from Hitler, would you not steal an election from him? Obviously, you would. Obviously, you would do everything possible that you thought you can get away with to cheat him out of winning the election. That's what you would do. So they've been telling us for 4 years that he is worse than Hitler and that, he's going to bring death, destruction to various minorities and to this country, and that he's going to be this terrible, evil dictator. If you believe any of that to be remotely true, your moral duty is to cheat in the election. So now we see all those funky things happening as after the election is over. Why should we think you didn't cheat? Why should anyone think you didn't cheat? You tell me you're so immoral, you wouldn't cheat to stop Hitler? If you would cheat to stop Hitler, why wouldn't you cheat to stop him? You just been saying for 4 years he's so bad. And I was like, wow, that's a fantastic argument. It really is. It's a great point. That it's not just like, it's like they would feel like they're the good guys for cheating. Like that makes you heroic. Hey, I'm keeping Hitler out of power. So why should we not think? And then when there's all these signs that, these things that are shady that are happening, and that, counts of hundreds of thousands of ballots that just all go for Biden in the dead of night when no one's looking. I'm supposed to think, oh, that's something that's statistically anomalous in ways that has never happened in any election before, but all of a sudden happened here in one state after another. We're supposed to think you didn't cheat? When that would be the immoral, terribly evil thing for you to do, to not cheat based on your own position? When he said this, I was just like, wow, this guy's sharp. I actually thought this man is an asset. This man, people like that who can think things through in a way and express it so articulately are an invaluable asset towards a cause, because there's no counter argument that you can come up with for that. What are you going to say? No, it's totally. You shouldn't cheat Hitler out of an election. You shouldn't. What are they going to say? No, we didn't really mean it when we said he was so evil. In litigation, the best questions and this was taught to me by James Gear, phenomenal attorney, who taught me how to practice law when I first got admitted. So the best question you can ever ask is one that you do not care what the answer is. That's the best question you can ask. No matter how you answer that question, it helps me. I just need you to give one answer or another. Pick one answer. Either answer helps me. Those are the best questions. And that's the question. So should you morally cheat or not to stop worse than Hitler from coming back to power? And if you tell me that, yeah, you should morally cheat, well, then obviously I shouldn't trust anything that happened. Everything that happened, I have to go through with a fine-tooth comb. Anyway, so that was the first time that I became, we're talking November, December of 2020 is the first time I really was like listening to him at all. I became an instant fan of his. And when we all heard about his terminal illness, it was very heartbreaking. And alas, he passed. He passed today. So thank you, Jay Wills. Let's kick this off. R.I.P. Scott. I want to, how about simultaneous siptos, l'chaim? There actually was like a 30-minute video, which I haven't watched yet. Maybe I should have watched beforehand. I haven't watched it yet, but I do want to watch it. And I plan on reviewing that with you. The one thing that I want to address before I handle that is there was the major controversy that he had in over the last 5 years is when he allegedly said something racist about Black people. And some of you may recall the incident, some of you may not. And I think that it's important in honoring his legacy that we clear this thing up once and for all. Because if you just hear the words like a clip of what he says, it sounds terrible. But that's out of context. If you actually understand who Scott Adams was, you can appreciate that. You appreciate the statement. And I think that this story that I found here does a reasonable job of breaking down exactly what this entire controversy was about. So I want to get this controversy out of the way, and then I'm going to go through his final statement. And there's like a 30-minute video that I plan on watching with you guys here. So Dilbert Scott Adams says, white people should get the hell away from black people. This came down, I think, in 2022, 23. February 2023. Dilbert creator Scott Adams, who has previously claimed he's been a victim of racism in Hollywood and corporate America, went on a racist diatribe this week, labeling black people as a hate group and saying white people should get the hell away from them. It's not completely fair, but it gives me enough to work with. I don't have to worry about what Martha Ross is going to say here. During his Real Coffee with Scott Adams online video program Wednesday, the controversial East Bay cartoonist offered up his latest provocation. He cited a recent poll that he said shows that nearly half of all blacks are not okay with white people. If so, Adams said, that's a hate group. Adams cited a Rasmussen survey of 1,000 American adults. This is the survey here. So he said, oh, I can't get this. All right. That dealt with the phrase, it's okay to be white. The ADL has deemed the phrase a hate slogan and started a trolling campaign to embarrass themselves because the ADL loves doing that. Among other things, the Rasmussen poll found that 72% of 1,000 American adults surveyed with the statement, and even a majority of black people, 53%, did as well. The poll also found that 79% of respondents agree with the statement black people can be racist too, including 66% of black people. So 2/3 of all black people recognize that black people can be racist. Adams focused on other data from the poll. He said it revealed that 26% of black respondents said it's not okay to be white. 26%, more than 1 out of 4, said it's not okay to be white, and 21% they said they weren't sure. I'm not sure if it's okay to be white. That's 47% who cannot say, yeah, it's totally okay to be white. That's insane. With a degree of amazement, Adams said that's 40% of blacks not willing to say it's okay to be white. That's like a real poll. This just happened. Adams said the poll demonstrated that there's no fixing current racial tensions in America, which is why white people should live in largely segregated neighborhoods. That's the conclusion he came away with, which is a thoroughly natural and normal conclusion. You're telling me that it's pretty much a 50-50 shot that this person is going to say that there's something wrong with me because of my race, that I should be living next door to you? That doesn't make any sense. Based on the current way things are going, the best advice I can give white people is get the hell away from black people, the 65-year-old author exclaimed. Just get the F away. Wherever you have to go, just get away, because there's no fixing this. This can't be fixed. Adams said he already self-segregated by moving to an area with a very low black population. It's not clear he was referring to the Tri-Valley town of Pleasanton, where he was known to be living in 2020. After Adams said that this is one of the first political polls that he ever changed my activities, he sarcastically claimed he's always tried to help the black community because it brings positive social benefits. I've been identifying as black for a while because I like to be on the winning team, Adams continued. And I'd like to help. I always thought if you help the black community, that's sort of the biggest lever you could find, the biggest benefit. But it turns out that nearly half of the team doesn't think I'm okay to be white. Given the poll results, Adams said he's now going to re-identify as white, arguing that he doesn't want to be a member of a hate group. I gotta be white because I can be part of a hate group, which he claimed he had accidentally joined with his supposed black identification. So when I became black, I didn't realize I was joining a hate group. So now I'm going back and I'm going to say I'm white again. Adams said I'm going back to from being helpful to black America because it doesn't seem like it pays off. The only outcome is that I get called a racist. Adams continued by suggesting that black people don't value education as much as other groups and by claiming he's sick of seeing video after video of black people beating up on non-black people. He also said we should be friendly. I'm not saying we should start a war or do anything bad. I'm just saying get away. Adams concluded his comments by laughingly saying, and there we go. You didn't expect that today, did you? I'll tell you right now, I don't see anything wrong with what he's saying here. Out of context, yeah. But I'll tell you that he's he's simply saying if this poll is accurate, why would you want to be around that? It doesn't make any sense. And so it's basically made as if he's trying to say, like, let's hate on black people. He's like, no. He's not even saying I want to hate on black people. If he was saying I want to hate on black people, we should all hate on black people, I would think that's a terribly racist thing for him to say. I don't think it's racist for him to say, hey, look, I'm going to stay away from a tiger. I'm going to stay away from people who basically think my existence shouldn't be. Somehow this now gets twisted into perverted into him being racist, which I think was a terrible injustice. It was predictable. So maybe it's not injustice because he knew what was going to be coming as a result of him saying that. So it's not like I'm not crying for the sufferings that Scott Adams had. He knew when he was doing this, he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was saying. But I'm simply saying, I think that you sort of have to be kind of short-sighted to look at what he's saying and say, like, this is his way of saying he hates black people. He's like, no, I'm just not going to hang out with people who openly hate me and think I don't have a right to exist. It's not okay that you're a white person. That's not okay. What the hell's wrong with you? Imagine someone saying it's not okay that you're a black person. He didn't even say that. So instead of labeling the 47% racist, he's saying someone who doesn't want to be around that 47% is the racist one, which that's the retardo world that we've created here. That's the retardo society we were living in. 47% cannot say it's okay to be white. You think that there's 47% whites who would ever say who would struggle to say it's okay to be black? Someone asked me, is it okay to be black? I mean, absolutely. My instant reaction is absolutely. Why would you even hesitate on something like that? 47%? That's a pretty astonishingly high number. That's a very high number. That's kind of crazy. Maybe there are 5% of white people who would say such a thing about black people. I don't know. Maybe it's as high as 10% saying they're not sure. I cannot imagine it's 25%, 30%, 47% of white people saying that about black people. So, yeah, him saying, I don't want to be around this is actually, that's a healthier response than saying, no, I'm going to beat the hell out of you for having that position. He's like, I just don't want to be around this. You should stay away from them. That's what I recommend to you. Stay away from them. And obviously he means the black community as a collective. He doesn't mean a specific individual. But some of my best friends are Jews. Breck Nixon says, thank you, Joe, for honoring Scott Adams. I've been crying just a little now and then all day. You're welcome. It's very sad. It's very sad. By the way, that was $10 from Breck Nichols, which counts towards our goal, as does this chat over here from Walkman Do. Walkman Do. The OG internet dad, all the wisdom, laughter, and passion he tapped into his former self, might have called the ether with all the lives he changed for the better. It's true. It turns out he was channeling God. Thank you, Scott. Amen. I have no doubt that he's in heaven right now, and your kind words are a fitting attempt to do justice to the man. I don't think any of us could. I think he was a great man. He was very talented, and he gave of himself. He gave himself to make society a better place, and that's a nobility that merits all of our honor and respect and appreciation. So John Mosley, thank you so much for the super chat. This is the final message from Scott Adams. Actually, I'm gonna let Shelley read it. Let's just watch the video here.
Everyone, unfortunately, this isn't good news. Of course, he waited till just before the show started, but he's not with us right anymore. I'm going to try to get through this. He has a final message that he wanted to say, so I'm going to try to read it, trying to be strong.
What I'm gonna do is this.
If you are reading this, things
Let's just listen to her.
did not go well for me. I have a few things to say before I go. My body failed before my brain. I am of sound mind as I write this January 1st, 2026. If you wonder about any of my choices for my estate or anything else, please know I'm free of any coercion or inappropriate influence of any sort. I promise. Next, many of my Christian friends have asked me to find Jesus before I go. I'm not a believer, but I have to admit the risk-reward calculation for doing so looks so attractive to me.
It's very funny.
So here I go. I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior and look forward to spending an eternity with him. The part about me not being a believer should be quite quickly resolved if I wake up in heaven. I won't need any more convincing than that. I hope I'm still qualified for entry. With your permission, I'd like to explain my life. For the first part of my life, I was focused on making myself a worthy husband and parent as a way to find meaning.
I believe this is his former wife reading this, by the way.
That worked. But marriages don't always last forever, and mine eventually ended in a highly amicable way. I'm grateful for those years and for the people I came to call my family. Once the marriage unwound, I needed a new focus, a new meaning. And so I donated myself to the world, literally speaking the words out loud in my otherwise silent home. From that point on, I looked for ways I could add the most to people's life, one way or another. That marked the start of my evolution from Dilbert.
And that's the mark, really, of a great man. It's like, how can I use my abilities to make the world around me better?
An author of what I hoped would be useful books. By then, I believe I had enough life lessons that I could start passing them on.
Thank you.
I continued making Dilbert comics, of course. As luck would have it, I'm a good writer. My book in the useful category was How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. The book turned out to be a huge success, often imitated, and influenced a wide variety of people. I still hear every day how much the book changed lives. My plan to be useful was working. I followed up with my book, Win Bigly, that trained an army of citizens how to be more persuasive, which that correctly saw as a minor superpower. I know the book changed lives because I hear it often. You probably never know the impact the book had on the world, but I know. And it pleases me while giving me a sense of meaning that is impossible to describe. My next book, Lose or Think, tried to teach people how to think better, especially if they were displaying their thinking on social media. That one didn't put much of a dent in the universe, but I tried. Finally, my book, Reframe Your Brain, taught readers how to program their own thoughts to make their personal and professional lives better. I was surprised and delighted at how much positive impact the book is having. I also started podcasting a live show called Coffee with Scott Adams, dedicated to helping people think about the world and their lives in a more productive way. I didn't plan it this way, but it ended up helping lots of lonely people find a community that made them less lonely. Again, that had great meaning to me. I had an amazing life. I gave it everything I had. If I got any benefits from my work, I'm asking that you pay it forward as best as you can. That's the legacy I want. Be useful. And please know, I loved you all to the very end. Scott Adams. I'm going to invite some others on because I just don't know that I could do any more.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you so much, Shelley.
Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, Shelley.
I think we should do the sip. I'm going to go get my coffee, okay? But I think we should.
We're
sip.
ready.
Okay, give me a minute.
Yep. Today we're gonna sip to our best friend, our internet dad or uncle, our mentor, our sage. I just think it's a life well lived that he touched so many of us. And Jack, I don't know why I feel like you're going to be more composed. Do you want to do our sip today?
No sound, Jack. No sound. Here's a mute.
Oh, Jack, are you on mute?
Yeah, no, I said I'd be honored. And
Awesome.
I didn't think I'd be doing two shows like this, so close to each other, but here we are. So, folks, as everyone knows, all you need is a cup, a mug, or a glass, a tankard, chalice, or stein, a canteen, jug, or flask, a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. We like coffee. And join us all now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes everything better, even saying goodbye to old friends, the simultaneous sip, and it happens now. Go.
To Scott.
To Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Jack.
Of course.
Oh, yeah. Who just wants to talk now?
I can tell you that he predicted it yesterday.
Of course.
Yesterday. He had to make me take a video of him too, because he wanted to make sure everybody know that he was. He knew last day, and I videoed it. I don't know if I could show it, but I did video it.
We believe you. That sounds just like Scott too. He loved that when he was right with the prediction. It was just so so dad like.
He knew he was going to be right, and he wanted to make sure I had it on video.
So, yeah, I'm not sufficiently familiar with the only person I recognize here is Jack Posobiec. I'm not sure who these other figures are over here. As I said, I haven't watched this yet. So I thought that letter that he shared there was, I think it just it tells you everything you need to know about Scott Adams. And yes, I'm not sure who these other four are. I'm sort of looking. Anyone know who this woman here is? Top center, and these left to right on the bottom. If you can weigh in with that, I'm gonna take your word for it. Like, don't give me Mandy Patinkin or something stupid like that. Like, give me real names. That's Erica. These are just regular people that watched him. Is that all this is? It's just regular people that watched him. Josh, Lisa C, Erica, Sergio.
He said he knew it was a different feeling than how he'd been feeling before. He definitely knew it was a different feeling.
And Shelley, he was peaceful and surrounded by everybody he loves, right?
Yes. Yes. He was definitely peaceful.
That's amazing.
A few years ago.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say a few years ago, Scott had said that he's having a daydream. This is maybe 2021 or so. He said he was having a daydream, and in his mind's eye, he said that he saw the day, the hour, and the minute that he would pass away. And he shared some of that with us. Some of you watching, we remember that. And it was in that moment 5 years ago. I thought, wow, there will come a day when that happens for us in third person, and we're the witness to life and the beginning of his legacy. And I thought about that 5 years ago, and I only had one child at the time, and now I have three, and all three of them know Scott Adams, the name, and the books. And it sounded like there might have been a little bit of authorial desire for Loserthink to have a sort of a second life. And I feel like it's a bit like my responsibility now to make Loserthink, the book that he wished had done better, to make it be all that Scott had wanted it to be. But the preciousness of his work will live on. And I was reading to some of my followers last night excerpts from the 1997 book of his, 29 years ago, The Dilbert Future, and how prescient his predictions were. It's time to find in his works and enjoy the sip daily in his honor. Shelley, thank you for reading his statement. That was sweet and wonderful and honored him well. Thank you very much.
Can I give a quick shout out to the Locals family? I'm watching the chat to my right, and oh man, you guys, I know how you're feeling. I know how a lot of people are feeling, but his beloved Locals, and we have become such a tight family. And I'm looking at your chat right now, you guys, and I know you guys just want to cry and scream and make the clock turn back.
That's Barry Weiss.
But Scott really taught us well, and we can reframe this.
This is Barry Weiss.
And we will.
I've heard the name Barry Weiss. She always looks different to me. Every time I see her, she looks different to me. I seriously don't know which of these two women is Barry Weiss, but whatever. Some of you are talking about his comment that he made there as far as betting on, playing the odds and accepting Jesus and and making that statement, writing that statement out as a statement of betting the odds, which is often referred to as, I saw someone here in the chat refer to Pascal's wager. That was over here, 6 saying, "One Joe discuss his thoughts on Pascal's wager, half in, half out of the water." which I think is an interesting. It's an interesting concept. It's an interesting concept. And frankly, I'm not sure how much more of that I really want to invest because, yeah, I just sort of feel as if I don't know. I don't feel like I'm getting from it what I was hoping for. So, I think Pascal's wager is the logic behind it sound? Yes, it is. It is sound logic. But then the question is, does it work? Like, if a person does it exactly the way Scott Adams just did it, does that work? Most theologians have questions about whether it actually has effect. There's a distinction between Christianity and Judaism, where an essential part of Christianity, maybe not to all Christians, but to many forms of Christianity, as I've seen, is the acceptance of Jesus as your Lord and Savior. And that is something that is a prerequisite to getting into heaven from those Christian theologians. That is a concept, that premise, the concept is far into Torah, not simply with respect to Jesus, but even that whole thing is really, we have 13 beliefs that we're supposed to have, which is like a constant thing that we're supposed to continually believe in and to accept and to embrace as being truth, which are essential towards being considered, a proper Jew. So it's very hard for me to compare because, first and foremost, according to Christian, I think that there are probably different perspectives on Christian theology as to whether or not this works, right? Does the math and the logic behind Pascal's wager make sense? Yes. But then the question is, if your motivation is to satisfy, the get out of jail free card and like sort of wave that as your get out of hell free card. So then the question is, if your motivation is purely just get out of hell, does that work? I can't answer as to what Christian philosophy says on that. I'm very poorly equipped to weigh in on that because I haven't spent nearly enough time studying Christian theology to really tell you whether or not that does anything from a Christian perspective. From a Jewish perspective, no one that's not any sort of prerequisite towards getting to heaven. So I can't really tell you what that statement that he wrote out there, even if he expressed it out loud. I don't know if it has to be expressed out loud or if it has to be in writing. I don't know anything about it. I certainly know far less about it than probably most of you. So I sort of feel ill-equipped to weigh in on his specific statement as to whether or not it satisfies a requirement. I see some of you, one person here who claims to be very religious who says it does nothing what he did. I don't know. But when I mentioned, just by parallel, when I was mentioning, the 13 essential beliefs of Judaism, so what I would tell you is, to the extent, I would certainly say that someone coming to it purely because they're scared of going to hell, I don't think that is an ideal, but it's definitely better than nothing. That's my perspective on it. And there's actually indicia of this, that's the road towards a pure acceptance of God. By that I mean that Torah teaches us that it's not simply that there's a concept of acceptance of something, what we call lishma, which is for its own name or for its own sake, versus lo lishma, which is that there's some sort of personal interest, right? So let's say someone says, hey, I'm going to give charity to this school for the blind. Okay. Something that I think most people would say that's a very noble thing. School for the blind, they're helping teach kids how to cope with life. So let's assume that that's something that makes God smile and, whatever. And that's something that's a positive deed. It's something it's fairly objectively considered a positive deed rather than being very subjectively like, saving the whales might be harming something else. This is something that just seems purely positive, purely giving, right? Helping provide food for a soup kitchen. Something that is imagine someone doing something like that. And you have two people who are doing the exact same thing. Let's say one person is giving $5 because they really care about helping the blind. And you have someone else who's giving $500 because they really care a great deal about the impact that people are going to be like, wow, John is such a great guy. He just gave $500 to that school for the blind. And that's really his motivation. So that's a selfish motivation. In this context, we refer to in Hebrew as lo lishma, not for its own sake, but it's for a completely selfish reason that you don't really care about the money so much as you care about the acclaim that you'll get from making the donation. As opposed to someone who has much less money, who, digs into their pocket and is like, no, you know what, if this is an important cause, I'm going to give to them $5. So then you can ask yourself the question, which of these two people has done a greater act in the eyes of God? Well, to answer that question, I'll tell you first and foremost, I'm not God. And I don't have to, and it's not our job to sit there and try and say, which one does God smile on more? The one who's giving more money, but not for a proper reason, or someone who's giving less money, but is purely for the sake of genuinely trying to be altruistic? Which one makes God smile more? I don't know. I don't know, but I will tell you that Torah philosophy teaches us that every person starts their motivation. The initial time when you're starting it is not for purely altruistic bases, meaning the road toward getting towards doing acts that are genuinely pure, genuinely noble, genuinely altruistic, invariably starts with some sort of selfish interest on some level. It may not be something as petty as the acclaim of fame, of popularity, or recognition. It might be some other less petty reason. It might be something that you feel guilty. So I feel guilty not doing it, and I can wash away that guilt by giving the money. I don't really want to give the money, but I feel guilty not giving it. So I don't think that's really altruistic, because you're sort of buying your guilt away. You're sort of buying away the pain in your gut that you feel guilty. So in that sense, I don't think that's a purely altruistic thing. Suppose someone was like, no, I really want to help them. That's a higher level of donation that someone's doing there. So someone who's trying to wash away their guilt, they're getting a benefit that they're washing away their guilt but it's not as ignoble. It's not lacking in nobility to this. It's not nearly as petty as someone who's like, oh, I want to become famous, or, people talk well about me, and I'm going to buy that with the $500 donation. So what I'm saying is there's all these different levels. And it's not simply with respect to charitable works. It's really with respect to anything that we do. It's with respect to helping a friend change a tire, or other kindnesses that we bestow on others, that a person can train themselves over time to actually become someone who's doing altruism for noble acts, but that we actually start from a selfish place, and the objective is to grow into something greater than that. So the reason I bring up this different scale of these different things is to make the point that just like when it comes to doing acts, good acts, kind acts, good works, people would call it, starts at a place that is less than ideal, at a place that there is some sort of selfish interest on some level. And the objective is to train yourself to become someone who's evolves beyond that into something greater than that, someone who actually is genuinely kind-hearted, someone who's genuinely, caring about others. So, you need to take that first step of first doing it in a less than ideal way. And then over time, you train yourself towards that. And that all of life ultimately is walking down that road towards making yourself into making, or climbing up that mountain, I guess some would say, into making yourself into a better person. So someone who actually takes the step of, let's say, so let me just talk about the basic concept of, as I mentioned, the 13 essential core beliefs of Judaism. One of them being that there's only one God, right? So someone says, I believe that there's one God because if I do that, if I say that, in that case, I'll be able to get into heaven, right? I don't read someone consider himself an atheist his whole life, but then like near the end, he does the Scott Adams thing. I'm just looking at this from a Jewish perspective because, like I said, I don't really know enough about Christianity to weigh in on that. But I'm just looking at this from a Jewish perspective. There's someone says, I believe that there's one God, and because if I say that, in that case, I'll be able to get into heaven. So now I would say, is that ideal? No. Is that where he should hope to be ending his life? No. Hopefully he would come to a genuine belief and recognition that there really is just one God. Like that's where you ultimately should get to. But it's better to go up to that step in a less than ideal way, the same way it's better to be giving charity of $500 rather than giving nothing at all. So, giving charity of $500 to see your name in lights rather than giving nothing at all. So that's why I'm saying that all these different steps. So is it an ideal thing? And this is my answer to that question. What I think about Pascal's wager is that if someone is motivated towards, accepting God because of a purely selfish interest rather than actual recognition of God, from a Torah perspective, I understand, at least, I can't say I'm an authority on Torah, but from my perspective, my understanding of Torah perspective, I'll tell you, is at the very least, that's a step in the right direction, which is better than not taking that step. So, yeah. That's my best answer on that. There you go. Scott did Pascal's wager for his followers of faith to give them comfort, but any just God will welcome him in their arms. Well, like I said, I said before we even heard that whole bit about him that I think he's in heaven right now. So, yeah, I don't know what he was doing in his private life. Maybe the guy was torturing cats. That's just not my read of the guy. So. No, then again, I don't think that all of heaven is like the same thing. People look at it like it's like, once you get your pass to the playground, so to speak, the eternal pass, then now everyone's in the same zone. And I don't think that's true at all. I think that's a crazy perspective. I think that's an illogical, bonkers, bizarro perspective. So people like to say like, oh, if they get out of hell and they get to heaven, so in that case now everything is Yankee Doodle for them, and that just doesn't make sense. When I say Yankee, it's definitely bad. Look, hell is really terrible. It's really terrible. I firmly believe that hell is terrible, terrible. Like whatever you think hell is like bad, it's like 1 billion trillion times worse than that. It is really awful. But escaping that doesn't mean that there's, that an afterlife is eternal bliss, and that two people get to heaven and one of them is a far greater human being than another, that they have, let's say, the same access type of thing to like the same enjoyment out of heaven as each other. So because I think it's crazy. It's crazy to think that someone who actually, let's say, spends their entire life dedicated towards helping people, right? That's really all they do all the time, okay? Like they're just self-sacrificing, continually like just bending over backwards and deeply devout and helping everyone they know, and like just spends their entire life doing that. And then you have someone else who's just generally a good person. So I think, but they both go to heaven, but I just don't think that they're in this. I don't think it's the same. I think that there's different places you can access into heaven, or different experience that you have in heaven, depending on the nature of just how great a being you are here in this world. So, people think, oh, once I get the pass, I'm good to go. It's like, I don't think that's true. I think you're going to be like disappointed if you don't, really try to maximize your time here. So, yeah. So I think a lot of people go to heaven. I think a lot of people, Jew, non-Jew, I think there's a lot of people in heaven. I just don't think it's the same experience for everyone once they're there. That's my take on it. And I have rabbinic authority that helped me come to that conclusion. I didn't just come up with that. Scott did pass go for his, and I'll tell you this, I think that's actually a very noble thing. I actually think that this is an act of nobility. Like trying to alleviate the aggravation of his followers. I think you can really basically put that as something that he's trying to like make people happy. So, right. Assuming I assume he was not Jewish, right? So I assume. The wager is a philosophical statement of belief. You have either to choose what makes logical sense. Pascal was Catholic, so I'm not sure what he did applies here. I have hope he's in heaven. Yeah. When you say he, I assume you mean Scott Adams, not Pascal, right? I read it first time as Pascal. I was like, no, wait, he probably means Scott Adams. He probably means him. Probably doesn't really care much about whether or not Pascal's in heaven. Not too many people are saying they're worrying about Pascal's afterlife. Hands One Pack says the media attempted to cancel him again. Canceling can only be effective once if allowed. Scott refused to let the first cancellation succeed. No, he was based. Dude was awesome. He was really awesome. So only have good things to say about Scott Adams. Okay. Before I get to our next topic, which is about, I wanted to talk to you about Trump's thing, Trump's changes that he's bringing, which you're gonna like, assuming that he keeps any of them, or all the more so if he keeps all of them. But before I get there, I just had a few other things I wanted to break down for you. These were little blurbs that came across my timeline that I was just like, I just need to look into this or share this with you guys. Someone wrote this about Renee Good. And we're going to talk a little bit about what was going on in Minnesota because that's just what we do, right? I don't know if this is true or not. And frankly, I don't even know how to research this. Maybe one of you out there knows how to research this. A conversation about Renee Good. She was that woman who tried killing an ICE agent and died in the process. So Cory Booker put out something here from this idiot, and I didn't really care about that. I was basically disputing that. But someone responded to me on this, criticizing the agent. I don't really care about this because he's an idiot. But then someone wrote this, and I was very confused whether or not this is true. In response to the critique of me, someone wrote, this bitch lost custody of 2 of her children with 2 different fathers and was married to a bitch that was arrested for putting cigarettes out on a child. She deserved it. Stop defending her, you absolute cuck. I was struggling to try and find out whether or not this is true, because I am curious about this, because they are trying to turn her into, Saint Karen Floyd, or, Saint Renee. They actually, the new phrase on the left is be good, be good. Oh, you see what they did there with the word good? Good. Yeah, be good. You should be good. Which to me, that'd be a curse in the context they're using it, because they're basically wishing death upon you. But yeah, this what I saw of this when I looked into this so far is that she had a former marriage and her ex got custody of the 2 kids, which Could mean that she was deemed unfit. It could mean that the father wanted them and was in a better position to take care of the kids, and that she was fine with it. It's not the same thing as them being taken away from her by the state at all. So I don't want to criticize her in ways that are inaccurate. I don't know anything about his wife. I am curious when she was arrested for putting cigarettes out on a child, because I have a feeling that she's going to start becoming a media darling, and gross. Everything about these two is gross to me. This whole thing is just gross. The left loves lionizing folks who are just terrible role models. Terrible, awful, disgusting, awful role models. So I wouldn't be surprised if Renee Good's wife was some lunatic who put out cigarettes on kids. Wouldn't be remotely surprised at all. But if any of you know anything about it, just holler. I'm very curious. It's Renee Good, the one who tried killing an ICE agent and was shot by him instead. Anyhow, so I wanted to call that to your attention. I also want to call this to your attention. I regret to inform you, liberal white women are now shaving their heads. Oh, wait. What she wrote was, we watched Renee Cook get brutally gunned down by ICE. This poor woman, this lunatic, they're so stupid. They're so stupid. We watched Renee Cook get brutally gunned down by ICE. ICE has shot at least 3 other people before this, and countless others have suffered and disappeared because of them. I'm sick of feeling helpless, like there's nothing I can do, so here's my peaceful protest. Well, no one's gonna sit there, crying about your two-tone hair, bad dye job, grown out dye job. I don't even know what this is. Whatever it is. And those locks going away. So I think it's hilarious that she doesn't even know the woman's name who she's shaving her head for. But here we go. There you go. Don't you feel better now, honey? Don't you feel better? You're such a good person. There you go. So they're so stupid. Look, this is better than driving their vehicles into ICE agents. And I kind of like when they self-identify. They let the world know, just, hey, I'm someone who's deranged. So if you see a woman with a recently shaved head, know this: either she's truly a victim and suffering from cancer, or she's deranged. So just be aware. Just be aware of that.
Who is Renee Cook? You made a video shaving your head on the internet, and you put this little caption, oh my gosh, I care so deeply, virtue signal of the week. You don't even know her name. You don't even know her name, and you are shaving your head on the internet. Oh my gosh, you guys. Asylums. Bring back mental institutions. What? You don't even know her name. Are you guys just like waiting for any excuse to shave all your hair off?
That's pretty much what it is. It's an excuse to shave your hair off and show what a good person they are. It's an excuse to show what a good person they are. That's all it is. That's what it is. But that's not the evil person of the day. The evil person of the day is someone who calls the act of trying to run over an ICE agent a small act of defiance. A small act of defiance. This jackass.
When I look at that video,
you clown, you doofus, you stupid, twisted, evil, freaking piece of hot garbage.
I don't see both sides in a dogmatic stance.
I can't stand you. I can't stand anything about you. I can't stand the fact that I'm gonna have to clip out Jon Stewart and his stupid daily show, which is with their forced canned laughter there, with his weeping now or whatever. I'm gonna have to carve this part out because they're so controlling about anyone seeing an image of freaking Jon Stewart here, even if I'm criticizing and using in fair use, and they know I'm not gonna bother fighting them on this stupidity. So instead they're gonna be like, I can't believe you showed 40-second clip from X of Jon Stewart. So, and his stupid retardo opinions here, where he's like, no, this is not both sides. Who's instigating it, you jackass? Who's instigating it?
I see a woman, maybe naive.
Maybe naive, maybe lethally dangerous. Maybe naive. Maybe a menace to society. Maybe a potential murderess. Maybe naively, you have someone standing in front of you. It's an icy road, and you rev the engine as hard as you can. Put the car in drive and hit the gas as hard as you can. That is a monster. A naive, maybe naive.
Sitting in a car thinking she has to do something and she's going to block something.
Sitting in a car thinking that she has to do something and she's going to block something. Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right. Was she shot while she was just sitting in the car blocking? Was that what got her shot? Is that what did it, Johnny boy?
And a wildly extreme overreaction.
A wildly extreme overreaction.
To that small act
here in Minneapolis,
of defiant.
A small...
Things are pretty quiet, despite what the media is saying.
Oh, I know
People
what that
in Minneapolis
is.
are...
Give me one moment. Sorry about this. I had a pop-up over here that all of a sudden this thing just started playing on me. Yeah, so Jon Stewart comes on up here to basically call it a small act of defiance, and he basically is pretending that he's sitting in the car blocking traffic. That's why she died. Oh, is that really it, John? Is that it? Nothing to do with just like not that part of it. A small act of defiance. It's just a small act of defiance. Doofus. So outrageous. Such bad faith. It's the fact that he's purposefully trying to twist the truth in order to outrageously portray the actions of a guy who's in fear of his life, put in fear of his life by this lunatic, deranged, shaved head woman. And speaking of these deranged lunatics, this was a funny moment I want to share with you. Oh, is he? I haven't checked him out in a while. Maybe I have to do a rebuttal video of him. We'll see. KVL says there's criminal records that say she was arrested for abuse and child endangerment, but doesn't say specifically why. Wrong. Renee Goods, according to the parents' interview. I'm not sure what you're trying to say, Karen. Not sure what you're trying to say. But I'll share with you here. I thought you were going to like this clip. You're going to like this clip. This one you'll like.
I don't care what they told you. If you guys get in my way, I will arrest you.
Sir, we're just observing. Please calm down.
You can observe all you want.
I am observing. Do you
Stay
see
back.
me in the way? I am back.
You had anger issues as a kid, didn't you? Were your parents present? You should be ashamed of yourself, man.
You should be ashamed of yourself, man. It's Pedro for president is here criticizing.
He is.
Yeah, clearly.
I love my job. Thank you.
I love my job. Thank you. This guy's awesome.
Yourself, man.
He is.
I love my job. Thank you.
You love your job?
I can't believe I get paid for this.
Really?
I can't believe they pay me for this. I do this stuff for free. I do this for free. This is great.
I do this for free.
Really, I get $200K. I'm a physician assistant.
How long did you go to school for that?
Over 7 years.
I went to high school. I make $200K.
People regard me as someone valuable in society. What
I make $200K as a PA. Oh, well, I make $200K. And you spent 7 years at school. I went to high school. I make $200K. What the hell are you doing wrong? Well, that doesn't matter because people regard me as a valuable person in society.
People regard me as someone valuable in society. What about you?
Oh, I think he's a freaking hero. I think he's a freaking hero. I think he's awesome. I think he's a very invaluable part of society. There are millions like me who think that this officer here is an invaluable piece of our society. Far more invaluable than your typical physician's assistant.
Your expertise? No. Come out and report it.
I love this guy doing that. That's awesome. He's like, hey, I do this for free. Can't believe they even pay me. They were not expecting that. They were not expecting that. Oh my God. Speaking of not expecting that. That was for a horn. That horn was for a red one that I see down there coming up. I find it interesting that you can hear the screams of one of her buddies when she starts resisting moving the car. No! No! Yeah, you know why that is? Because they all knew what she was doing was asking for a bullet to her head. They all knew it before the shots are even fired. It's a great point that I don't really hear. I haven't brought up myself, and I don't really hear other people talking about it so much. There's someone right before Renee is shot, when she puts that car in drive, there's a scream of no, as if like almost like the person knew she's about to get herself killed. She's about to get herself killed. That's what that no was. Everyone knew. You don't do that. Why would they do this? Why would they do this? He could have done this. He could have pulled out a red cape and gone Olay and sidestepped the bull. Yes. Great call, Heisenberg. Great call indeed. God bless Liz. Thank you, Joe, for scanning through these videos because I couldn't do it. I'd lose my ever-living mind listening to the morons. Yeah, well, you're welcome, especially on the Jon Stewart one, because invariably, whenever I play anything from those cucks at The Daily Show, I get dinged. I am sure the people who are watching this after the fact are going to see that I had to basically like edit out any. If you don't know what she's referencing, or I'm referencing with the Jon Stewart thing, that's because that means YouTube maybe edit out after the show saying Daily Wire notified us that they're making a claim against your video and they need to shut this video down. So instead of fighting it, which would kill its views forever, I just probably going to carve that 3 minutes out. That's just what you have to do. So I'm very hesitant to ever put him up because I know just how impossible they are. So Oh, Renee Goods, according to the parents' interview. Oh, that was her name was Goods, not Good? Someone with the same name, different person? I don't know. I don't know. Liz, if you like that, you're gonna love watching this. You're gonna love watching this. Here we have another tardo who decides I'm gonna block traffic so I can stand in the way of ICE. And nothing you can do to me. I'm blocking traffic. Nothing you can do to me. Oh, wait. Like, go before they grab you. Get out of here. Go. Now you can't go. Yeah. I didn't move. I couldn't move because there was something in the way. I couldn't move. That's why. Yeah. That's not working for me. Help that woman! They all screaming, clicking their cameras. They're so excited to get this ice catching this woman. I'm enjoying it too. Losers. This is something that we all knew was going to happen. When Trump came in and he won, I said, this is going to happen. It's going to be very hard to do it. It's going to be very hard to get these people out. It's a lot of work. And there's going to be a lot of fights over it. And it's more heart-wrenching when you actually see the people being removed. We need to remember that this is all ultimately Biden's fault. 100% Joseph Biden's fault. Speaking of $10 super chats, we have a second one here from the ghetto where Zelen says, Joe, I think they think it's a video game of some sort. After it happened, you can hear a lesbian on video scream, why did you have real bullets? Like they only carry guns that shoot light at them. Yeah, that's why'd you have real bullets? Why'd you have real bullets? Well, we're actually going after illegal aliens here, and some of them carry real bullets, doofus. Why do you have real bullets? They're all just LARPing. Oh, I missed this earlier. It was on today. I feel sorry. She forgot that defending gang members sex traffickers. What do we got this here? We got this. There's a link here that Zelian shared with me. There's 3 $10 super chats from the ghetto, if you're keeping track.
And it must be rough to be a Democrat right now. In the same week, y'all have had to defend Somalian fraud, the literal dictator of Venezuela, Russia, and a mentally ill mother of 3 children who decided to weaponize her SUV at ICE agents, resulting in her being killed. Now that I think about it, maybe that's what the tolerant left really means. It means you tolerate the stink of your own shit because you're too stubborn to admit that you're stupid. And it must be...
Well, that was courtesy of Uzelian. So that was faith in you, brother. I had faith in you. And that was okay. That was all right. That was not bad. I normally would have thrown that in, but yeah. Anyhow, so I count 3 $10 rants, just in case you're wondering where we're at here. 3 $10 rants. Probably should count it already. Probably should call it. All right. let's get into our commander-in-chief, Mr. President Donald John Trump, the great man himself, who he himself has had enough of these sanctuary cities.
We're given.
And he made a whole bunch of announcements today in his speech. And you're going to like some of these clips I got for you.
We're given 90-day notices to places like California, Scott. Right away, we're going to send out that notice. Who would bill the federal government as people poured into the state to send those people back because no country can afford to do it. No country can afford to take in millions of people, pay for their education, their health care, their hospitals. You just can't do it. And we all have a heart. You can't do it. But many of those people are murderers. They're people released from jails, prisons, mental institutions, insane asylums. They're people that are drug dealers. They're addicts. Additionally, starting February 1st, we're not making any payments to sanctuary cities.
We're not making any payments to sanctuary cities?
Or states having sanctuary cities because they do everything possible to protect criminals at the expense of American citizens, and it breeds fraud.
But it strikes me that we are
God.
undergoing an
Why?
epidemic of political vigilantism right now. Why are people showing up in vehicles?
Give me a moment. Sorry about that. Let's go back a little bit here. There was a pop-up.
Cities because they do everything possible to protect criminals at the expense of American citizens, and
Hell yeah.
it breeds fraud and crime and all of the other problems that come. So we're not making any payment to anybody that supports sanctuary cities.
That's, I don't know if he's going to be able to get away with it. He should. He should be able to get away with it. Frankly, if you ask me, I think that these sanctuary cities, these sanctuary states are unconstitutional, because you're basically saying that we're going to be a safe haven from ICE, right? It depends on the nature of what laws are applying to particular sanctuary city or sanctuary states. So, but I'll tell you, but it sounds like that's a violation of the supremacy clause. This could work theoretically. Clearly, this is something that's going to be litigated. The idea that you would withhold money from a particular state because they have sanctuary cities. So the question is, what monies are we talking about? How is this, is this something that you actually will withstand court scrutiny? And let's assume that this goes all the way to Supreme Court. We've seen that Congress certainly has the power of the purse to use its monies to pretty much ignore the state sovereignty that should be afforded under the 10th Amendment. Meaning, and I brought this up a few times before, so I'll just give you there's a case called Wickard v. Filburn from the 1930s, where the Supreme Court basically allowed FDR's New Deal. And they did this under a threat by FDR because he was a tyrannical monster. No one talks about that part of his legacy, but he was a tyrannical monster. And he basically told the Supreme Court that if you keep knocking out my New Deal here, I am going to pack the court and make you all useless. I'll just put in 11 justices or 15 justices who are all going to agree with me, and then you're going to have no say at all. So what the court did in Wickard v. Filburn is, because they basically said, hey, his whole New Deal thing, initially the perspective, the legal perspective was, you can't be forcing states and separating where you're spending your money. And basically, Wickard v. Filburn said, the Congress can use its money as an incentive device to get states to do what they want. That's essentially what Wicked Philbin said. And hey, look, you can't pass a law telling states what the speed limit should be because it's their state law. It's a state road. Where does the federal government say that? But you can pass a law which says that you're not going to be funding their roads unless they have a lower speed limit. And that's actually how we ended up getting a national speed limit, which at the time was 55. It seems to have relaxed somewhat in some places. But that's how we ended up getting the national speed limit of 55. That was the law of the land everywhere in this country for decades. So that decision from the Supreme Court implies that the federal government has the authority to use its spending power to incentivize as a stick and say, if you're going to do this, we'll give you money. If not, we're not going to give you money. Certainly, if you can find a way that it's related to what it is that you're asking of them, that you can get away with it. Actually, there was another decision which basically they started talking about the aggregate impact in order to give more federal power. The Supreme Court came up with the concept saying that the aggregate spending, so even if it's a localized sale that's going on, but if it's affecting the overall aggregate of interstate commerce, then you can also pass a law. Another ridiculous basis for extending federal power that was granted by the Supreme Court. But that's not relevant here. What's really relevant is the power of the purse that that Congress has, that they can basically ignore their normal constrictions, their normal restraints on their ability to tell states what to do. And because normally a state wants to pass state law, you can't do anything about it. They say we want to pass a law that's making abortion like this or like that. You know, as long as it's within the confines of the Constitution, they can do what they want. Well, now you can basically use the power of the purse and say, well, if you're not doing what I want, I'm going to affect spending in your state. And it's going to cost you millions, billions, potentially billions of dollars. You really that in love with your law that you're passing there? Because it's costing you $4 billion a year, $7 billion a year, $10 billion a year. So what Trump is basically doing is he's saying he's going to use the power of the purse to punish these states that have sanctuary cities. Can he do that? Well, Congress can do it. Can the president do it via an EO? I don't know. We'll see. It'll be an interesting question. Can he restrict spending? I'll tell you this much we can guarantee, that there will be, as soon as this policy were to go into effect, chances are very high that not very high. The chances are 100% that the state's going to go running to the local district court. So California will go running to the 9th District Court and say, give us an injunction on this. 9th District is going to give them an injunction. Sorry, let's say the Southern District of California. And then they'll go running from the Southern District of California, and they'll get an injunction from the Southern District, and then they'll go up to the 9th Circuit, and 9th Circuit will probably affirm the Southern District of California, and then they'll go from there. Maybe it's the Northern District, because it probably would be Sacramento. Right? Sacramento is the capital. But basically, we'll see it go flying through California. And over the next couple of weeks, we should anticipate, this will probably happen even before February 1st, that there's going to be this litigation as soon as there's an EO from Trump that's purporting to impact monies that are going to be spent in California and or in New York or any other places that there are sanctuary cities, Illinois, that these states are going to go running in there seeking an injunction and likely to get it from the lower courts, stopping him from withholding funding from them because they have sanctuary cities, and then it'll work its way to the Supreme Court. That's what we should anticipate is going to happen. What's going to happen to the Supreme Court? I don't know. It's too premature. We have to first see what his exact EO is. I'm sure that so far, what we've seen from this administration is that they seem to be very cognizant of the long-term impact and the viability of something from a legal perspective. They're very, very astute. Whoever the legal team is working for Trump's administration, I mean, we know some of the big names in front. You see Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche and Carmi Dillon, and all these, and you see all these intelligent attorneys at the top of things. I don't know if they're the ones who are actually drafting this stuff or there's lower level people, but I'm going to tell you that we've seen a very high level of competence from Trump's legal team in general. Because it's not the bigwigs at top who are litigating this. It's unlikely it's them who are drafting these EOs. But someone there who's helping draft these EOs that he's signing off on is very cognizant as to what is the best way to present this in a way that gives a court, likely the Supreme Court, authority to believe in this EO as something that is compliant with the law. Whether it's in the explaining the justification and rationale for it, the choice of statutes that they tend to rely on, where they basically very clearly planning ahead for the inevitable legal battle in a way that shows marked legal intelligence, marked legal competence. That, okay, this is probably the best argument we have to get this agenda be deemed compliant with the Constitution and with existing statutes in a way that, allows us to bring out the National Guard, in a way that allows us to ban DEI. They find the strongest basis, and then they'll to declare an emergency with the invasion of Venezuela. All of these different steps are based on, we have existing law. What EO can we put in based on all the existing laws out there that make this agenda that we want to push forward most likely to work within existing law that would be more difficult for a court to knock out, or I guess more palatable for a court to sign off on, because we know it's going to be challenged. So we should take stock and take heart in the fact that he has a great legal team. So for me to weigh in now as to whether or not this will work when he tries withholding funding, I have to see what his EO is first. Then I can at least start to try to give you my assessments, the chances of it holding up. But that was not the only thing on his mind today. He had more. He had more he wanted to share with you guys, and that I want to share with you as well.
Frozen all children's payments to those. We frozen all children's payments to those states that we're talking about, and we will now require proof of attendance in order to receive federal funding for childcare or any of that. How about all these?
Requiring proof of attendance for childcare. That sounds like something that makes sense. That sounds like something that will work.
Childcare places in Minnesota where there is no children. They go there, they get paid millions and millions of dollars. The biggest operation in all of Minnesota had no children. And we pay millions of dollars. They're scammers. They're scammers. They always will be. And we're getting them out, and we're not going to pay them. We're not going to pay Minnesota. Right, Scott? We're not paying Minnesota any more money for any of that crap. It's a big scam. It's a giant scam run by an incompetent, crooked governor. He's an incompetent, crooked guy. And also, we're freezing any and all welfare payments going to illegal immigrants that will start effective immediately. So when illegals come into California, Gavin Newsom, they come into California and they send us bills for people coming in. We're not paying it. So we're working on that very strongly. Just don't pay it. As Nancy Reagan would say, just say no. Remember Nancy Reagan, just say no to drugs. It's a little more difficult than that, I guess, right? But just say no. Additionally, from this moment forward, if you're on public assistance, like almost all Somalis are, did you see where 94% of them are on public assistance? You can't wire money out of the country back to your bank account from where you came. But more importantly, we're probably...
If you're on public assistance, you can't wire money out. I didn't hear that part of this before. That is genius. That is genius. Try fighting that. Like, try being a lefty fighting that. How dare you stop them from sending money back to their home country, taking a welfare check? That just because they're taking a welfare check means they shouldn't be able to send money to their home country? Obviously, I love this administration. People, that is that is a really shrewd move. That is a really freaking shrewd move.
They aren't even going to give them the money anymore, the money going to them because of the tremendous abuse and probably illegality being perpetrated on our country. We're not going to give them the money. We're not giving them the money.
I still can't believe he's our president. We haven't even had a full year of him yet. Here's him torching the Somali fraudsters. He's so sickened by it. He's so sickened by the fraud in Minnesota.
You know, they came from a place with nothing, and they come here and they drive around in Mercedes-Benz. You know, the Mercedes-Benz dealers do well in that area of Minnesota. Can you believe it? They have nothing. They get welfare payments, and they have Mercedes-Benzes. It angers me so much, but we're going to straighten out our country. This was done under Biden and Obama, very much under Obama. It all started under Obama. And we just can't. We've got a great country. We're not going to screw it up. But this was one of the great scams ever. They have the same thing, Somali in Maine. Who would think? I never saw that happening. But in Maine, it's really crooked as hell, too. But it's not just Somali. It is them, but it's not just. There are many other places, many other people. The whole country, if we stop this fraud, this massive fraud, we're going to have a balanced budget. That's how much money you're talking. We'll have a balanced budget without all the growth I'm talking about. And then you add the growth, we got one hell of a country. You know, they came from...
It's ridiculous, the levels of fraud. Ridiculous. But this man is such an amazing president. He is such an amazing president. So like I said, he was on fire today. If he can deliver even half of what he was talking about, if he deliver even half of it, if any one of those, what do we have there in the end? What do we just cover? So we covered that he's suspending payments to sanctuary cities, and they were going to require proof of attendance in order to get money. And we're not going to let you send your money back to these other. We're not going to let you send if you're on welfare, you can't send money back. You can't remit money back to your country of origin. And yeah, and trying to get rid of the fraud in general. He sees a problem, he fixes the problem. And he comes up with creative, logical solutions. And he's like, let's get it done. Why can't we ever have a Congress like that? Why can't we ever have a Congress like that? And finally tonight, there's a case that oral arguments were heard, which is called Little v. Heckox. And in this case, I'm going to tell you right now, as far as our goal, I put up on the goal here for tonight that if we hit our target of 15 super chats of $10 or more tonight, that I am going to give you an extra hour where I'm going to be reviewing oral arguments of Little v. Heckox. What is Little v. Heckox? This is an Idaho law which bans transgender athletes from competing in women's sports. And this trans woman Heckox has challenged this law as being a violation of his rights to pretend that he's a woman. So now trying to get before the Supreme Court to get an injunction on this law. Okay? That is That's the Secretary of State from Idaho is Little, so that's why basically they're suing. I think it's Secretary of State. I assume it is, but Little is the name of the state in this case. So Little v. Heckox, and Supreme Court heard oral arguments. I put up a goal tonight where I said, if we get 15 super chats, $10 or more, I'm going to have a full hour of oral arguments. We're now an hour. We have to do that within 2 hours. We're now an hour and 40 minutes into this show. I've been doing this gig long enough to know that when I'm watching videos like this, the super chats tend to die down. I don't blame anyone for that. That's a reality as far as the nature that there's not much really that most people find to say, which is, you don't have much to say. If I didn't have anything to say, I wouldn't be sending a super chat. Why would I expect you to be sending in a super chat? That's just not the nature of how our arrangement here would work. People send super chats when it works for them. And usually it's because they got something to say. When you're reviewing oral arguments, folks tend not to have much to say. Might be interested in what's going on, but it's more of a digesting type of thing rather than trying to give me their feedback. So in that sense, I know that that's the way things that's the way things work. Despite that, I do think that this is an important case. And I also appreciate the fact that it shows on YouTube right now that we have so far 8 out of 15 of our objective goal super chats. That 8 out of 15 does not count the 3 Rumble rants that we got, which really puts us at 11. It also doesn't account for the fact that we had this bomb of a super chat here from Liz of $100, which even though I try to get like multiple people to weigh in, I have to respect the fact that that's a very generous super chat she sent in. Even had a 20 earlier also from Walkman Do. So what I'm going to tell you is, even though our goal does not say that it looks like we didn't hit our goal, I am going to treat it as if we hit our goal. That all this buildup is to tell you I'm going to treat it as if we hit our goal, and I'm going to give us an hour's worth, a minimum. I'm going to make this show 3 hours long, and I'm about to start going into the oral arguments that were presented. They're very complicated. It's a very complicated area of law. But I'm telling you that even though I don't, on YouTube's not going to show like we're hitting the numbers, I'm treating it that way out of respect and appreciation for your generosity. And yeah, so I'm gonna be, and even though I don't expect to be getting much in the way of super chats going forward, so it's not going to look like we hit the goal. But as far as I'm concerned, we hit that damn goal. So good for you guys. Good on you guys, and God bless you, Liz, for your remarkable generosity. So anyhow, let's do Little v. Heckox. Let's start getting into it. First, let me get rid of a couple of these here. Heisman says, doesn't Liz have us covered here? I tend to look at it, like I said, I tend to look at it like I'm trying to motivate people, like to a lot of people to weigh in. I just enjoy the show more. I think it's a more enjoyable show. I definitely appreciate it. And so I always have this internal conundrum, what happens when someone is very magnanimous. And like I said, before you even sent this, I said, so I give it, I sort of like look at it like it's an extra credit type of thing. I can't look at it like it's 10 super chats. And I understand that if she wanted to, she could have just sent in 10 times 10 and done it that way. So I always feel like sort of awkward like that. Anyway, if I'm erring in your favor anyway, so then no one has cause to complain, right? So, because most of Congress is bought. Donald John Trump can't be bought, so he gets crap done. Thanks for all you do, Joe. You're very welcome. My pleasure. And Clam 4119 gifting 5 new members of the following. Who do you bring in here before I get on in with this thing? Before I get on in here, 5 new members of the following. Please be aware that when I call your name here, this is a gift. That means you received a gift, that you were able to join the following, which is an assessment, which is a collection of probably the greatest gathering of like-minded individuals who are seeking greater personal growth through community, unity, learning, and thinking. Hence, you're part of the following. Following is not at all a cult type of cult. So don't get that twisted. Don't get that twisted. But it is appropriate to express your gratitude to Clam for gifting you with membership in this exclusive circle of friends. That includes you, the Dude 2369, Over the Hill Gang 9596, Breezy 109, Celsium Cat, and Rud1 RN 928. Welcome to the following. Please bear in mind that I am not at all the leader of the following. I'm just the host. Just the host. And with that, I think it's time for us to, without further ado, start hearing in on oral arguments. Oh, sorry. Dan Bishop says, good stuff, much love. Thank you. Oh, that touched my heart. That's very kind of you. All right. So we got Little V Heckox. Like I said, the arguments here are a little bit complex. So I'm going to do my best to break it down so that you understand what is going on here. Okay, so we're all on the same page as to what is happening here, because these arguments are kind of complex. But don't worry, you'll understand. By the time we're done, you'll understand.
We will hear argument first this morning in case 2438, Little versus Heckox. Mr. Hurst.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice.
Hurst is speaking on behalf of the state of Idaho. So he's coming in here. He's the petitioner. Why are they the petitioner? Because there was an injunction against the state of Idaho saying you can't put this ban in effect. Heckox is a student at Boise State University who wasn't able to compete in women's sports.
May it please the court. Idaho's law classifies on the basis of sex because sex is what matters in sports. It correlates strongly with countless athletic advantages like size, muscle mass, bone mass, and heart and lung capacity. Tragic.
Now, you need to understand when they say classifies, that what does the state law essentially do? It says if you're a transgender woman, if you're a male, you cannot compete in female sports. And accordingly, yeah. So that's classification based on sex. You've probably heard about different levels of scrutiny. The question is this law constitutional or is it not constitutional? What would be unconstitutional about it? If it violates the Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment, which says that, hey, you can't treat different people differently. You can't treat one race differently from another. You can't treat men different from women, whatever. Okay. You can't distinguish on the basis of race, religion. The Supreme Court, over its history, has said we're going to create different classifications as to what type of scrutiny. So now we have a law that someone says this is violating the Constitution. This law is not constitutional. What type of scrutiny will we give it? And we're called upon as the Supreme Court to determine, is this new statute compliant with the Constitutional or is it unconstitutional? Does the Constitution forbid this statute from taking effect? So the Supreme Court has come up with 3 different yardsticks, 3 different groupings as to what type of scrutiny they're going to give a law. When they're looking at a law, how hard should they try to knock it out versus when should they try really hard to knock it out? When should they really give the law the benefit of the doubt or something else? So whenever you're talking about something that's allegedly a discrimination, so the 3 classifications are strict scrutiny, which is when the court is basically looking to knock the law out. In order to withstand strict scrutiny, the court will look at this statute and they'll be like, okay, so this statute seems like it might be kind of racist. So let's try to assess, since it seems like this is racist, let's assess here first and foremost, is it something that is a compelling need? You need to show that this is it's compelling, that you have a problem here, that you passed the statute to fix a problem. That's why you perceived in your state there was a problem, so you wrote this law. But this law is kind of racist. So the first thing we're going to assess is how big a need is this problem? Sometimes you have something that's like, we'd like to sort of make things a little better. Sometimes it's life and death that we really must fix this. Not all statutes are written with the same type of level of need. In order to withstand strict scrutiny, if it's in this highest level, type of scrutiny, you have to first and foremost show that the reason we passed this law was there was a really compelling need. Like this was an emergency. Like this was going to be disastrous if we did not pass this law. That's why we wrote this law. Then, even if what your need is really, really great, you need to establish that the way you worded this statute was as narrowly tailored as possible to fix that problem. So it's got to be as narrow as you can possibly do it. So whenever you're infringing on freedom of speech, now you're going to be because it's a fundamental right. Now, a state X, whether it could be Tennessee, it could be New York, California, Florida, whatever it is, they pass a law which is infringing on someone's freedom of speech. If they're infringing on someone's freedom of speech, so now first the reason that they're passing this law has to be very compelling need. Like you really, really need to do it. And then the way you structure the law has to be as narrow as possible that, look, this is directly fixing the real the problem that we have here. If you don't have both of those, and we're in an area of a civil rights violation, a potential civil rights violation, that's real core civil rights violation. So freedom of speech, freedom of religion, a racial bias. These are something that are considered our core things that are going to get strict scrutiny. If a statute is potentially stepping on those things, we're going to apply a strict scrutiny, and we're going to knock this statute out unless it can be shown that the reason for the statute was a very compelling need, and when you wrote this statute, it's as narrowly tailored. It's not bringing in added things or other people grouped in, that it's as directly addressing the problem. So, compelling need, narrowly tailored. That's strict scrutiny. That is the most heightened level of scrutiny that the Supreme Court will have. Then you have, on the opposite end of the spectrum, something that might be infringing on things that are not really that essential a thing, but it's affecting your rights in general. So there, we're going to have a rational relation test, where we basically say, is there some sort of need that the state was doing? They're not looking to be arbitrary and capricious and harm people. Yeah. All right. And does the law seem to fit in with addressing that need? Yeah. Okay. Good law. Fine. We're not going to knock it out. It's obviously a much, much easier yardstick, which is why one of the frequent fights that you'll see litigants have is what level of scrutiny is the court supposed to apply? What is the proper level of scrutiny? Because anytime something is facing strict scrutiny, that statute is in very shaky ground. It's difficult to survive. Well, that's where most of the statutes that the Supreme Court knocks out, those are the ones that get knocked out. Rational relation test. Once you get into rational relation test, it's almost, the state is going to win almost every time. It's very hard to beat the state there. You have to show that there was no reason to make this law. It's retarded and it's just hurting me. That's a very hard thing to prove. So when you're in a rational relation, that's the lowest level of scrutiny by the court. If you're trying to knock out the law, you're pretty much dead man walking. But there's a middle standard. There's middle scrutiny, which basically is that middle standard is when you're talking about is what they come to specifically for one particular thing that has fallen. That has said we're going to give this middle level standard, and that is a claim of sexual bias. Why the court came to this, no one knows. But they basically said it doesn't have to be a compelling need, but it's got to be an important need. Not just something that's sort of okay. It's got to be an important need. And then, so if it's not an important need you're trying to fix, and now there's potential for that there's a sex bias based on gender, in that case, we're going to say if there's not an important need, that's not going to be a good statute. So you need to have an important need. And secondly, you need to have it that it's going to be it's reasonably addressed to take care of that problem. Is that what it was? I always forget what let me make sure I got Is it reasonable? It's not reasonably. No, it's what's the yardstick? Let me get this. Cap on restraints. I don't know. I'm drawing a blank on what the level is. It's not just rationally related to fixing it, but it's not quite the same. It's not nearly the same level as narrowly tailored. Anyhow, so this over here is obviously an issue related to potential sex discrimination, and accordingly, we're in that middle ground territory. Where one of those rare instances we're in that territory. Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. I gotta try to remember. I'm gonna try to remember. I gotta stop this. It's like a bad habit. I can't quit. This is a good place for you. I heard KGB sounding bad in this oral argument. She always sounds bad. She always does. This kind of case analysis is what I joined the following for. Keep up the good fight, my lady. You're welcome. And I appreciate the love. Welcome, Aggering. Welcome indeed. All right. So with all that in mind, now you understand that we're in this middle ground territory on this whole on this statute here. And he's saying it's classified as a sex. So like, why would you make a distinction based on sex? He's like, there's no other way to do this. So yeah, that's why we have to do this. How are you supposed to keep out people who are a potential hazard without referencing sex?
But not surprisingly, male athletes have even injured female athletes in many sports. If women don't have their own competitions, they won't be able to compete. Gender identity does not matter in sports, and that's...
I just want to say on the record, to me, women's sports is... I'm like, all right. I get it. There's an upside to women. Well, like, you know, this would destroy women's sports. If you can't keep trans out, you're destroying women's sports. Gender identity does not matter in sports.
That's why Idaho's law does not classify on the basis of gender identity. It treats all males equally and all females equally, regardless of identity. And its purpose is exactly what the legislature said, preserving women's equal opportunity. In fact, it's our friends on the other side who want to classify based on gender identity. They're seeking special treatment for males who allegedly lack an unfair advantage, but only if those males also identify as transgender.
So, and this is an interesting point that he's making. He's like, no, we're just basically saying that only women can play women's sports. So you're the one trying to make a distinction. Are you saying that we shouldn't have women's sports? Is that what you're saying? You're the one who's trying to make a distinction within the subset of men that some men now, because they identify as women, should be able to play. You're the one who's making the other side, meaning the petitioner, the trans woman, whatever that means, is trying to make a distinction within the male gender that those people in the male gender who are now able to go in, they should be able to go compete in the women's thing, in the women's sports. He's like, you're the one who's making a distinction in them. They're biologically the same as men. And we're basically treating it based on biology. Biological male, go play. You have to play in men's sports. You can't play in women's sports.
Denying special treatment isn't classifying on the basis of transgender status. It's consciously choosing not to. Idaho's sex-based classification would get intermediate scrutiny if Hecox challenged it. But Hecox's requested relief presupposes separate women's sports.
So now the question is, do we come into this, does he get this mid-level scrutiny or not? And he's trying to say he's not entitled to the mid-level scrutiny because we're not discriminating based on sex. We're saying no men can go play in women's sports. That's the way, if there was no such thing as trans women, he's not challenging and saying men should be allowed to in women's sports. If that's what he was challenging, in that case, that would be a problem. But He's only saying people who identify as trans. And here's the interesting question that I don't think that this has been addressed by the Supreme Court yet. I'm not sure, and I could be wrong, and some attorney who's watching this, if you're watching this and I'm mistaken about this, please make sure you correct me. The question is, is trans, a ban against trans, is that something that gets intermediate scrutiny or not? I don't think it does. It's not qualified as something that gets intermediate scrutiny. If there's a law which says, hey, only men can do this and women cannot, that's going to get intermediate scrutiny. This law says that men cannot compete in women's sports. This is all men. It cannot compete in women's sports. And the petitioner doesn't have a problem with that. The petitioner is just simply saying, I want you to classify me as a woman. And they're like, well, we're not willing to do that. So you're asking for special treatment. You're not attacking the law in the sense that it's keeping men out of women's sports. You're attacking it that you're saying people who identify as a woman should now be classified as a woman and be thrown in there. But you're the one trying to look for special treatment for some men. Just because you're trying to find special treatment for some men to ignore the general rule, you're basically accepting the premise. You're starting with the premise that, yeah, men not in women's sports. In fact, the trans women wouldn't want men to be coming into women's sports. The reason they're going into that sport in the first place is because they're trying to get away from the men. So they're not trying to abolish female sports. They're basically saying, look at us as if we're females, even though we're biologically not. So what Alan Hurst is pointing out here is we're not the nature of to the extent that we distinguish on sex, they're okay with that. They're trying to say, no, look at us like we're women. So now you're trying to pretend that you've earned intermediate scrutiny, that we're against specifically trans. I don't think they get intermediate scrutiny. And accordingly, he's saying you're trying that the respondents here, Heckox, is trying to say we're entitled to intermediate scrutiny. Alan Hurst is like, you're not, because you accepted that our limitation on keeping men as a general rule out is okay. Once you accepted that, we're not making any other distinction. We're just saying men are here, women are there.
All Heckox challenges is the law's application to a tiny subset of males who identify as transgender and suppress their testosterone. But that's not how intermediate scrutiny works. Idaho's law is a substantial fit for 99% of males, and a perfect fit is not required. If it were, that would be the end of all sex-based classifications. Finally, a word about mootness. When trying to avoid mootness below, Heckox told the court, I intend to play women's club soccer this semester, next semester, and through the remainder of my time at BSU.
Now, here's the question. I mean, it's an issue that, let's say this guy graduates or is no longer, or, rips his leg out and doesn't want to compete anymore in sports. So in that case, this is now a moot issue. The time the lawsuit was first brought, it may have been relevant to Heckox, but now it's no longer relevant. So now it's moot. And if it's moot, the Supreme Court's not supposed to be hearing it anymore. So I think Hurst wants to be here already. And I think that's why he's trying to say there's not that the affidavit I think it's possible that they're trying to say there's a mootness issue, and he's trying to overcome that.
A contradictory post-cert affidavit does not make it absolutely clear this controversy is over. So Heckox's formidable burden isn't met, and this case isn't moot. I welcome the court's questions.
There'll probably be some questions about mootness, but I'd like you to, in focusing on the equal protection analysis, the sex classifications in sports is not being challenged.
That's correct.
How does that work in this case when we're talking about one individual being accepted from a particular or included in a particular category?
There's no basis for heightened scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny in that situation, Your Honor. If the sex-based line passes intermediate scrutiny, which no one disputes that it does, then the edge cases, the potential exceptions, that's all rational basis review.
And rational basis review, again, that's the lowest standard, which is something that the state almost always wins on. So that's why he's trying to say we should be rational basis, because no one is arguing. Heckox is not arguing that men should be kept out of women's sports. So we just said biological men cannot play in women's sports. They agree with us. Biological men should not be able to. They're simply saying take us out of that group of biological men, which is applying to a tiny subset of men, less than 1% of all men that are trying to get out of being qualified as men. But that means the overall law itself is not no one's challenging that this is an invalid law and requires scrutiny. So he's saying this should be a rational basis, a rational basis test. And once it's rational basis review, the state is almost certainly going to win.
That makes no sense to me.
No, surprise, surprise, it makes no sense to Sotomayor.
All right. And I don't know how you can say sex classification is not being challenged. There's no question here that a male who identifies as a female, but it's a male, is being excluded from a female sport, correct?
That's correct.
All right. By its nature, that's a sex classification.
No, it's not, because the statute itself is not talking about the statute itself speaks for itself, and that part of that statute, Hecox agrees with, that men should be kept out. So all Hecox is saying, I'm not a man. Well, that's that doesn't all of a sudden make this now a question that the statute itself is a question is now something that's a sex-based issue.
And all sex classifications, we have said repeatedly in our case law, require intermediate scrutiny. Now, what you're saying is, well, she's not challenging males generally not playing. She just doesn't want to be the one male excluded. So it's a subclass of people that she's challenging, correct?
Yes, I think that is correct.
All right. So how do you square our various case law, Caban, Lear, Claiborne, VMI in particular, all of whom involved a subclass of people who challenged on equal protection grounds their exclusion from a definition?
I'm happy to take those cases in order, Your Honor, starting with Caban. There was no notion of as applied anything in Caban. In Caban, it was a facial challenge to the statute, and individual circumstances were used as examples to prove that the statute was overbroad and lacked substantial fit.
That's
okay. So now, I didn't have a chance to research all of these different cases that are going to come up during the course of this. The Caban case is a case from 1979. So in Caban, in case you're wondering about that particular case that they're talking about now, I think it was the state of New York made a statute which said that if you were going to give your kid up for adoption and you are not, if you're a woman who's a single mother and you want to give your kid up for adoption and you don't have to notify the father. So in contrast, a single dad would have to notify. And if they were married, then you would have to notify the husband before giving the kid up for adoption. So Caban said that was a sex discrimination case because you're basically treating men like they're an inferior class to women. And I'm not sure. I mean, that's the case that was the case over there. So so he's addressing. So she's like, that's a sex-based case. And he's like, yeah, okay. But he said, let's look at that. It's a facial challenge to the statute, saying the statute is overly broad. So they used examples of, let's say someone's married, let's say you have a father who's very involved with the life of the kid. Why would you keep the father out of it? None of that seems fair to, it's overly broad that even, look, there's some fathers who the kid has no idea who the dad is. So that would make sense. But what about when you're dealing about a case, it's overly broad because there's countless people who have a problem, who are very involved in the kid's life and should be notified if, in fact, the kid is going to be adopted, is going to be put up for adoption.
That's what she's saying here, that the state interest here is the safety of women, correct? And promoting competition. That's the state interest. And in Caban, the state interest
was in ensuring that only children with active parents, let's say, were given a state benefit, correct?
Yes, and Caban was struck down facially. The statute was considered unjustified.
How about Lear?
So she just lost on Caban, and he basically was like, yeah, so there the entire problem with everything about the statute was wrong. What's happening here is Hecox is saying the way you're applying this law to me is unfair, right? In other words, I got no problem with men being out. I want men not in women's sports, but the way you're applying it by classifying me as a man is unfair. So that is the unfairness. So you're saying as applied now is something, the way you're applying this Idaho statute and keeping me out of women's sports on the basis of male genitalia, that is unfair. That's what Hecox's claim is.
In Lear, we had the same.
That's the opposite. That's the subclass, the people who were excluded.
In Lear, the court said the law would be justified with respect to you, plaintiff, and because the law would be justified with respect to you, you are not able to challenge the law elsewhere.
All right.
So the
How
court
about
says,
BMI?
So she just lost on that one too. You're 0 for 2 so far, Justice Sotomayor. Big surprise.
That distinction doesn't make any sense to me. It's still an exception. It's a subclass of people who are covered by the law and others are not. That's what we said.
the VMI case is the flip side of Idaho's law. The VMI case, equal opportunity required letting women in to previously single-sex spaces. In this case, equal opportunity for women requires giving women separate spaces. And VMI said that was okay. VMI said separate housing.
That's begging the very question at issue here. You can have a sex classification based on sex. You just have to have a reason for it and one that matches your exclusion.
That's what we have here.
What you're trying to say is we don't even look at the reason to see if it has a scientific basis.
The reason we don't look at the reason in this case to see whether there's a scientific basis is because no one disputes that there is a scientific basis for separate.
Everyone knows that it's insane to have a male volleyball player spiking a ball at a female woman and paralyzing her. Insane woman.
Is the dispute of that?
I'm sorry.
It's so ironic, by the way. It's so ironic. You got these three female justices on the left, in Kagan, Jackson, and Sotomayor. And, you know, traditionally women were standing up for women's rights, and they're, in this context, totally standing opposite women's rights. And I don't know where Kagan's going to weigh in here, but.
Are you then saying, Mr. Hurst, that there really is no such thing as an as-applied equal protection challenge?
No, Your Honor, but what I am saying is that equal protection, the question is whether the classification is valid and not whether it makes sense in individual situations.
But that sounds to me as though, and you know, I think our precedent is actually very sparse in this area, sort of surprisingly sparse. But it sounds to me as what you're saying is, as long as the classification is facially valid, a person does not get to come in and say that with respect to some subclass, a small subclass in this case, a person doesn't get to say with respect to some subclass, there's a mismatch, that the justification has run out, that the justification doesn't apply. You're saying that that really is just not an available argument.
I agree that is not an available argument.
And he's right. Why should it be an available argument?
I think this court has taken that approach, our approach, in cases from Conn v. Shevin all the way to Wynn. And Wynn is the best example because there the petitioner had been raised in the United States by the U.S. citizen father. And the court said Congress's interest in making sure there's a connection with the United States is enough to justify the classification. Well, this petitioner obviously had the connection with the United States. There was no basis to apply these justifications to that petitioner. Didn't matter.
I mean, one thing that this case could be about is, and this case I mean generally, this litigation, is whether the plaintiffs are right here that there is a mismatch, right? You know, and some of your briefing addresses that question. Right, you can take all the hormones in the world. You can take all the puberty blockers in the world, you say, and there still will be a competitive advantage. That's one thing that this litigation could be about, and one way to resolve this litigation. Another thing that this litigation could be about is this deeper and, as I say, surprisingly unanswered in my mind, equal protection question about what an as-applied equal protection challenge is and whether they exist.
So you're admitting that, he says they don't exist. You're trying to invent that they should exist. Again, just so you understand what they're talking about with as applied, right? Let's understand what we're talking about. We're trying to figure out, is this a sex-based discrimination and get intermediate scrutiny, or is this not a sex-based discrimination, in which case we're in a rational basis review? So what Alan Hurst astutely pointed out on behalf of the state is this. The only place that there's a sex discrimination is this law says men cannot play in women's sports. Does the petitioner, does Hecox disagree with that? No, Hecox agrees. Men should not be able to play in women's sports. So the general notion behind the law that's making a distinction between genders, Hecox is fine with that, which means that this gender discrimination is not here. What is Hecox claiming that there's a problem? They're saying the way you're applying this law to me is discriminatory against me. And since it's the way you're applying it to me, it's not discriminatory against all men. It's discriminatory against this tiny, tiny group of men who are identifying as being women. And since it's not discriminatory between genders, but just a tiny subset, a tiny group of men who identify as being trans. So now the way you're applying this law ends up being something that is a discriminatory against this group. And what Alan Hurst says is there's no such thing as applied on a sex discrimination case. Why are you coming up with such a thing? And Kagan is admitting there's not really much law as to whether or not there is such a thing or not.
And I guess, you're suggesting that we should, well, I don't really know what you're suggesting, because here you're saying, look, just do it that way. They could be right on the science and we would still win.
Meaning, even if the trans were right, that there's no advantage to trans, even if somehow, that was the science proved that out, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter at all. Because we're just making a rule against all men and applies to all men who have male genitalia. So it doesn't matter whether we're right that they have an advantage or not.
A lot of your briefing really contests their view of the science. So which way should we think about this case?
We think that equal protection jurisprudence is about the validity of classifications. It takes a classification to trigger the doctrines to begin with.
What's going on here? What's going on? I am 21. Either engage chat, video, or Joe, or reduce volume chat so your last chat leaves the screen until you're next. Okay. Okay. Let's all calm down. Let's all calm down. This is what we'll do. Okay. This is what I'm gonna do. I haven't done this in a minute. We'll just have like a little. We'll have like a little delay here. Okay. So. Boom. There. Heisenberg is a monk.
And then you ask, is the classification justified under intermediate scrutiny? And so that we think that's the right approach. Is the classification justified? Not is it justified in each individual instance, because as Wynn said, this court has never held, Wynn said, that a law has to be capable of achieving its ultimate objective in every instance. And as soon as that possibility of forcing the legislature to justify the law with respect to individual plaintiffs is on the table, intermediate scrutiny is over. That is strict scrutiny.
And that is a great point he's making. If you're trying to sit here saying we have to make sure that this law is properly being applied to every particular individual, that now is strict scrutiny. Because what does strict scrutiny mean? Remember, we started the outset here. Strict scrutiny means that it's as narrowly tailored as humanly possible. So now you're trying to basically take something which would be intermediate scrutiny, which means that it's, it's palpably tailored. It's, it's reliably tailored to it. What was the yardstick over there? What was intermediate? Let me just get the exact language here so I can give it to you properly. Intermediate scrutiny. Important government interests and then the means are substantially related. So the means have to be substantially related. The law has to be substantially related to fixing it, not that it fits as narrowly as possible. And if you're telling me that it's got to fit for every down to like the 0.4% of men who identify as trans, well, it's perfectly good law for 99.6%, but it's not good for 0.4. That's already a strict scrutiny standard that you're saying it has to fit for everyone. Doesn't fit for everyone, it's no good. That's strict scrutiny, as opposed to that it's substantially related, which if it's working for 99.6%, it's substantially related.
I question the premise that you are putting forward.
Oh God, this is like insulate your IQ. Here comes Ketanji Brown Jackson. Insulate your IQ.
Even if I agree with you that equal protection is about, is this classification justified? I think that begs the question, what is the classification? And so to the extent that you have an individual who says what is happening in this law is that it is treating someone who is transgender, but who does not have, because of the medical interventions and the things that have been done, who does not have the same threat to physical competition and safety and all of the reasons that the state puts forward, that's actually a different class, says this individual. So you're not treating the class the same, and you're not, how do you respond to that? In other words, the as-applied challenge essentially redefines the class, or one could think of it as that. And so what's wrong with that, number one, and how do you square that?
Because that's making a strict scrutiny now.
With our
he just answered your question before you even asked it. It's like, congratulations on wasting everyone's time, Justice Jackson.
In Caban, which Lair later described in this way. In other words, Lair suggested that Caban was establishing that as-applied challenges of this nature do exist.
Certainly, take the second question first.
Yes.
Caban says nothing about as applied. I know that Lair says later this was an as applied case, but simply reading Caban, it does not say that. It simply applies intermediate.
No, I understand, but those two cases were in juxtaposition with one another, and Lair comes out the way it does, distinguishing Caban on the basis that it's an as applied challenge, and we in Lair have a facial challenge, and it's basically the same facts. So if you're right, that those two cases can't come out the way they do.
I don't think so, Your Honor. Again, Lair was actually briefed as a standing argument of maybe you might be able to argue that this law is overbroad, but you individually are not in the overbroad part, and therefore you don't get to challenge it. The court didn't use standing language, like express standing language in the opinion, but that is the logic of the opinion.
Mr. Hurst.
Yes.
There's another way to think about the case your friends on the other side posit, and that is that transgender status should be conceived of as a discrete and insular class subject to scrutiny.
And that's something that they very much want. Transgender want to be recognized as their own class, so this way they can get the intermediate scrutiny on anything. That's something that they are desperate for.
The scrutiny in and of itself, given the history of de jure discrimination against transgender individuals in this country over history, in immigration and family law, cross-dressing statutes, they give a long laundry list, and I'd like you to respond to that.
Certainly, on the de jure discrimination point specifically,
De jure is a Latin term meaning by law. Okay, so in contrast to the phrase de facto, you see here it says certainly de jure discrimination. So when they're talking about de jure discrimination, that means actual statutes that were written which were against trans community. So, for example, making it illegal for men to dress in women's clothing. There were traditionally statutes like that. So they're saying, well, we faced de jure discrimination. There were all these, and there was anti-trans laws. So that's why we need this special protection.
there has been some discrimination against transgender people, significant discrimination against transgender people in the history of this country. The same can be said of many groups. The same could have been said of the mentally disabled in Cleburne, et cetera, et cetera. I think Justice Alito's concurrence in Scrimeti is helpful with this in saying this quasi-suspect class or suspect class process, what we're really looking for is classes that look like race or like sex. And if you compare the discrimination in this case, where not one of the laws they cite actually classifies expressly on the basis of transgender status, if we look at that history and we compare it to the history of African Americans and women who were not able to vote, who were not able to own property, who had express classifications based on their status written into the law for most of this country's history, these things don't compare. They're just not alike.
So what he's saying is these statutes basically said men can't dress as women. That's not a law for all men. So that's not same thing as saying women can't vote. We're saying those are exactly the same as the sports thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please.
Okay.
There are two things in that answer that are kind of at odds with one another. You start by saying you don't question that there's a history of discrimination, I assume de jure, in this country. Mm-hmm. And then you say, well, but they don't classify on that basis. How should we think about that?
That's a good question. It's a fair question that Gorsuch is asking.
I think that the famous footnote 4 helps, right? This has been a discrete and insular minority. Has it been a group of people that were recognized as a group where laws were passed on the basis of their membership in that group, demonstrating that they lacked the political power to protect themselves in the political process? This is from Justice Barrett's concurrence, of course. We just don't have any of that here. All they can point to is conduct. It says, no cross-dressing, no drag performances in bars, these kinds of things. As I think our friends on the other side would admit, people cross-dress who aren't transgender. This is not a classification on that basis.
Perfectly said. That's perfectly argued. Right? A lot of men may have dressed as women without being transgender. And they too, under those statutes, would be prohibited from dressing as women. So it's not something that we're punished, that there's a law. What they call a law against transgender is not a law against transgender. It's a law affecting all men that might affect the transgender community more than it affects, other men, but it's affecting all men the same way. So they're not being punished as a separate class of trans people. You don't see statutes that are punishing people that's saying trans people can't vote. Trans people can't ride the bus. Trans people can't get welfare. There's no statutes like that. It's just saying all men cannot do this. Now, maybe there's more of a desire by the trans community to do that particular thing, but it applies to all men. So you're not seeing laws that are, there's never been laws that have been harming the trans community specifically.
What do you do with the legislative history in this case, where the people who introduced the bill called it a transgender bar? So you in answering Justice Gorsuch, you said there's no evidence of that, but there's certainly a lot of comments in this bill when it was passed.
Your Honor, I respectfully disagree. I am aware of nothing in the legislative record that says that. I know that the Ninth Circuit opinion says that, but if you'll notice, the key quote that the Ninth Circuit relies on puts the words transgender women in brackets. And if you look up that colloquy in the legislative record, in their transcript that they provided in the district court, the word transgender, gender identity, et cetera, do not appear in that section of the transcript.
Meaning the Idaho legislature was intelligent enough not to say F the trans people. They were intelligent enough not to put that in the record, even in their deliberations. And so you can't say that this is designed to go get the trans people. This is designed to protect women from having any men in their sports.
Go back to the mootness question that Justice Thomas talked about, but not addressed here at all. Yes, this respondent made certain allegations about her intent at a certain point, but she signed an affidavit with this court attesting that she has permanently stopped playing sports covered by the ban. She will not try for any school-sponsored women's sports, and in fact, I think she'll finish school.
Meaning she wants to get out of this case, or he Cox wants out of this case. I think it's hilarious, by the way, you have a transgender woman whose name is He Cox, but I only just noticed that now. But for one reason or another, probably because they don't like the makeup of the current Supreme Court, they don't want the Supreme Court to make a decision here because they're expecting the Supreme Court to come out against them. So they're apparently Hecock's trying to say it's moot now, cancel the whole case, and Idaho is like, no, we're taking care of this now. We're getting this we're getting the Supreme Court to validate this now.
Very shortly. And there's no reason to question the sincerity of that belief, given that dropping out of sports puts you at a disadvantage where you lose your competitive edge. And she's going to graduate soon. How is this different than Atchison Hotel, where the person in the litigation made representations that she intended to visit and continue visiting hotels in the future? And then, when the case got before us, she voluntarily dismissed those suits, like here, with prejudice. And we then directed that the case be considered moot. How is that different?
To begin with,
I add one further difference between the two cases. Here, it's not like she's attempting to avoid us reaching the question. In just a little while, we're going to reach the identical question in another case. So we don't have a subterfuge in attempting to stop the court from reaching an important legal question.
I'll start with Atchison Hotels, Your Honor. In Atchison Hotels, no one disputed that plaintiff's plans going forward. In this case, even the district court does not credit the plaintiff's plans going forward. The district court struck the notice of dismissal and said, Hecox's plans have changed before. Hecox's plans could change again. And also, the court feels that this is somewhat manipulative in order to escape the Supreme Court's jurisdiction. None of that existed in Atchison Hotels, and that puts us in City of Erie territory, where in that case, the premises were sold. The business was closed. The owner was in his 70s. And they said, that's not enough. You could still reopen this business. Your company is still incorporated. Under these circumstances, where it's the respondent seeking through post-certiorari maneuvers to moot the case, that isn't enough. This case isn't moot.
Thank you, counsel. Justice Thomas.
This guy's doing really well. He's doing really well so far. I'm impressed with Mr. Hurst.
The justification.
It's weird because the name Hurst doesn't even sound Jewish.
For a classification as you have in Title IX.
It's a joke. It's a joke.
Male, female sports. Let's take, for example, an individual male who is not a good athlete, say a lousy tennis player, and does not make the women's and wants to try out for the women's tennis team. And he said, there is no way I'm better than the women's tennis players. How is that different from what you're being required to do here?
It's not all different, Your Honor, and that's exactly what we're concerned about, that their arguments about needing to make exceptions from an otherwise valid classification for people for whom that classification doesn't make sense, those arguments don't limit themselves to people who identify as transgender. Many males could say, I can't really compete with the women's basketball team, and therefore I should be able to try out. And I haven't seen an answer from the other side as to why they couldn't. Beyond, I correct myself. They say that, well, those people don't face the same dignitary harm as transgender people. But I don't see how that's relevant to the intermediate scrutiny analysis. The analysis is this classification substantially related to legitimate state interest? The person's reasons for wanting to violate the classification don't come into the analysis.
Justice Alito?
Justice Sotomayor raised the question whether the issues here are identical to the issues in the case we're going to hear in a couple of minutes, and I'd appreciate your views on that. Suppose we affirm or reverse in this case, in the other case, would that leave something undecided with respect to your case?
Yes, Your Honor. Our case involves the issue of the constitutional definition of sex, which the Ninth Circuit made a decision about what sex means for constitutional purposes. The Fourth Circuit did not make that decision. We will be bound by that decision going forward unless the court reaches that question. That said, I would dispute the premise of the question, because whether or not the court has Article III jurisdiction in this case does not depend on what the court might do another day in a different case.
No, that wasn't the premise of the question. It was just an attempt to explore the consequences of deciding the mootness issue one way or the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Justice Sotomayor?
So what Alito was asking was, like, if we just decide this in the other case, is that going to help take care of everything in your case? And this way we'll know an answer for your case. And he's like, well, yeah, we still have this whole issue as based of classification on sex that the Ninth Circuit weighed in on, the Fourth Circuit never weighed in on at all. So they're not addressing all the issues that we're addressing here.
It's a Munsing where GVR that's being agreed to here. So you're not bound by anything in this case. And our decision there will inform any new decision in the Ninth Circuit on this issue, correct? Whatever analysis we adopt in the Little case will control what happens in a new case.
That is the law, Your Honor, yes.
With respect to the Erie case, there, the 90-year-old man never said he didn't intend to open another business. He just said this business. And that was the distinction we saw. Here, she has said, I don't intend to do this. Now, every other promise that she made in this litigation, that she was going to continue trying out, that she was going to stay in sports, held true until this case and the negative attention she received, correct? To say she misrepresented her intent is going a little extreme when she honored all her previous intents and only changed her mind when new circumstances arose, i.e., the notoriety of this case, correct?
No, Your Honor, nothing changed externally to the plaintiff. The plaintiff's affidavit filed in this court says that there has been negative attention and so forth since the beginning of this case. The only thing that changed is this court granted certiorari, and then after that, the plaintiff said, I want out, and so I will stop playing sports.
Do you dispute that having a case named after you makes your infamy live forever?
No,
you don't think that Brown and any of the other named plaintiffs that we have in famous cases drawn attention to those?
When I filed my lawsuit against Mershan, I put Good Lawgic first, Good Lawgic LLC, versus instead of having my own, even though I sued under my own individual capacity and also my corporate capacity. So I put Good Lawgic LLC first instead of having my own name first, because I figured if this gets to the Supreme Court, I want it to be known as Good Lawgic v. Mershan, because that is amazing branding. That's you want your name there, right? So having the name Good Lawgic out there is certainly a lot more valuable to me than having the name Neerman out there. So it's true. It's true. There's a lot of everyone remembers the Dobbs decision, right? Everyone remembers that, having that name attached to it. There's a certain infamy. That's definitely true. Everyone remembers Plessy v. Ferguson. Everyone remembers the Dred Scott decision. Brown versus Board of Education. People remember.
People is people. Have you studied your law cases? Students do all the time. I think one of my colleagues had a course where they looked at the lives of the plaintiffs. Do you doubt that having a named case with such an eventful event is going to continue attention on this person?
I don't doubt there will be attention, and I confess
Negative attention.
Well, you don't know that. That's very speculative. How do you know it's negative attention? Maybe she wins. You don't know that. That sounds like Sotomayor is thinking that. It sounds as if everyone here is thinking that Hecox is going to lose. If Sotomayor is like sitting here, I'm worried for poor little Mrs. Hecox that she's going to have negative attention associated with her name for the rest of her life. And it's like, dude, grow a pair.
Confess I have studied a few law cases, but
have you studied the people?
To some degree, Your Honor. What I would disagree with is there's no background principle of plaintiffs get to leave the litigation whenever they want. Even Rule 41, even in just the district court, the rule is that once the litigation...
Little Hecox. Very little Hecox. Oh, my God.
hits a certain point,
so
you can't leave.
What you're going to assume, I know you don't want to, that you were to lose this case, you would say that we have to force an unwilling plaintiff who has offered to dismiss with prejudice, promised not to incur this activity again, we would force that person to continue prosecuting this case.
The court did in City of Erie.
That it did there, but is it the right thing to do? We didn't do it in Atchison.
In Atchison, no one disputed that the case was moot. The only question was which Article 3 question would be decided first. In this case, we dispute the case is moot. We dispute all of the facts that this is based on. This is a formidable burden that Hecox bears. That's from Nike, already v. Nike, to show that it is absolutely clear that this conduct cannot be reasonably expected to reoccur. We think, as the district court said in its striking order, that based on the changing history here, based on the past conduct, as Scalia mentioned in his footnote 3 of his City of Erie concurrence, there is a reasonable basis to doubt whether Hecox's current plans are the final plans. And as long as there's a reasonable basis not to credit the current plans, Article 3 lets the court hear the case.
Justice Kagan?
Mr. Hurst, I want to take you back to our conversation about whether there's such a thing as applied equal protection challenges, and ask you for two things. The first is I do think that runs counter to a couple of things that we think of as basic principles of constitutional law and maybe equal protection law particularly. In constitutional law, we often say as applied challenges are the preferred mode of constitutional adjudication. Certainly, we have not erected like bars to them in any other area as far as I understand it. And then in equal protection law, we say all the time things like people need to be treated as individuals and not as just as members of a group. And I'm wondering whether both of those principles don't suggest that any bar on equal protection as applied equal protection challenges is just wrong, is off.
If you plot, the reason it's wrong is because as applied, again, let's remember what we're talking about here, right? Just because I know this is a little bit confusing when they're talking about this as applied thing. I want you to understand. So both plaintiff and defendant, the Hecox, the individual transgender woman, and the state of Idaho both agree that it's perfectly fine and valid to keep men out of women's sports. Hecox is saying, that's fine. I just don't like the fact that you're applying to me the status of being a man. So the way you're applying this law is what I'm having a problem with. Your overall idea of the law is good, because Hecox sure as heck doesn't want no men in women's sports, right? Hecox, transgender woman, doesn't want to see all of a sudden some 6'4" athlete, spiking a ball in his face. So, or her face, whatever. But So Hecox wants to keep all the men out, just wants saying, don't apply this to me. So we're saying, as applied, your law is a problem. So now the question is, when you're saying I'm being discriminated the way you're applying the law, does that get this intermediate scrutiny that we say that this subgroup of men who are transgender, that they are now being sexually discriminated? Or do we say there's no such thing? So the Alan Hurst here said there's no such thing. It has to be that it's not fair to men. And since it is fair to 99.6% of men, just 99.995% of men, it's just 0.005% of men are identifying as trans. So it's totally fine. So Kagan is asking, well, in general, we like using as applied. That's a pretty fair basis to say, what status are we going to look at this as sex discrimination or not? Are we going to look at this as being racial discrimination or not? The problem with Kagan's law, and Kagan took examples of racial discrimination, right? So what do we mean as applied? So we're basically saying that, so if it's going to be affecting us, if it's going to be disparate impact, so the way this law is being applied, it's harming black people more than it's harming white people. Here's a great example. Okay? So if you pass a law like the Jim Crow laws, right? Jim Crow laws didn't say anything about black versus white, because that would have been unconstitutional. What did they come up with? They said, hey, you're going to make you have certain reading comprehension in order to vote. You can't vote unless you have a certain level of reading comprehension. So we're going to give you reading tests in order to enable you to vote. The way that would, so now that has a disparate impact on blacks who were far more literate at the time, certainly, than whites. So he said that there's a disparate impact there. So even though the words of this law don't really say we're keeping black people out, it was designed, we're looking at the impact and saying, is this, and we said it's racist in its impact, and accordingly, we're going to look at this and we're going to apply that strict scrutiny standard to it, even though the language doesn't mention the word black, white, anything like that, because of that disparate impact. That's a much worse impact on black community than the white community. So now, so in a similar vein, we're saying that, hey, over here, the way you're applying this law is having an impact on the trans community. So now she's saying, let's use this as applied. The way this law is being applied, it's now having an impact on the trans community. And the same way we apply it in race, we should be able to apply it here. Here's the problem with what her thinking is. The problem with her thinking is that that works with race, where you have a strict scrutiny standard in general with race. So if something might be racist, then it makes sense to do that. But when you're talking about intermediate scrutiny, when you're talking about something that has just that the yardstick for seeing whether or not this is a valid law is that it has to be substantially related to achieving an interest. If you're going to do as applied, that means it has to work in every circumstance. The difference between strict scrutiny and intermediate scrutiny is strict scrutiny has to be as narrowly tailored as possible. It's got to work pretty much everywhere. And if there are places it doesn't work, in that case, you can't. In that case, there's going to be a problem with the law. But when it comes to sex discrimination, it's something that has to be something that not that it's working perfectly, but has to work most of the time. So since it only has to work most of the time, it doesn't make sense to say, well, let's look at whether this tiny little group over here. Because then you're just you're changing what this intermediate scrutiny and pretending and treating it as if it's strict scrutiny. That's got to work for everyone. And that's already changing the intermediate scrutiny that you have for sex discrimination into a strict scrutiny. So that's the flaw in her logic here. I hope he comes to that. There's a good chance he will.
And then the second thing I want you to do after you do that is assume for me that there is such a thing. And to tell me how, in your view, an as-applied equal protection challenge ought to work in this case.
Certainly, Your Honor. The first answer would be, I recognize those principles that Your Honor is alluding to. The contrary principle would be the very nature of intermediate scrutiny analysis, that it is always possible if you only have a substantial fit supporting legislation, then it is always possible to find people whom it doesn't fit, and then we're in strict
So I
scrutiny.
completely take.
Bam. He nailed it. Perfect. Perfect response. Exactly the point I was making. You're treating it like it's strict scrutiny. You're actually giving them more protection you're giving women. Because women wouldn't get that level of scrutiny, but you're giving them more protection.
That point, Mr. Hurst. I mean, you're exactly right. And of course, intermediate scrutiny is different from strict scrutiny. It doesn't require the, almost perfection that strict scrutiny does. Completely take the point. But isn't that point really addressed to what we often consider in these areas, which is to facial challenges, right? So when you bring a facial challenge, of course, that's right, that you're allowed to have over-inclusiveness and under-inclusiveness and a lack of a perfect fit. But that the nature of an as-applied challenge is different.
Certainly the court could do that, Your Honor. The court has not done that before, as I think we both agree. And the result of that would be judge-made exceptions to laws anytime judges thought they didn't make sense for particular classes of plaintiffs. And the deference to the legislature that should exist to some degree, even under intermediate scrutiny, would be done away with. It would be gone. And then the administrability justification for many sex-based classifications, including this one, would also be gone because you could no longer administer the classification evenly. You would have to make as many exceptions as courts thought you needed to make. So it's really an institutional competence thing or institutional power thing between courts and legislature.
So
the point that, and this is a great point, he's like, if you want to start doing this whole as applied thing here, how's this going to work at the lower court level when they're trying to figure out how to interpret a law? How's this going to work? You're the one setting the precedent here. You're going to have judges all of a sudden start creating brand new classes. Oh, we're going to have the transgender. We're going to have the transsexual class. We'll have the transgender class. We'll have this class. We'll have that class. So that's, we're going to start inventing all these different classes now. We'll have the two-spirit class and the gay on Thursday class. It doesn't make any sense, right? Only just joined time to catch up. Oh, well, thank you.
So you're suggesting to me that the whole thing is just unworkable and we shouldn't, but flip to the second prong of my question, which is suppose we said, where as applied equal protection challenges exist as applied anything challenges do. What would it look like, do you think? What should it look like?
Yeah,
I got no idea.
I'm not sure what it should look like. I can say what it does look like in this case and why we think there's a problem with it.
So you're not willing to take me on my second path, which is like, let's assume that there is such a thing as this challenge.
Yes. I mean, the most I can say, I doubt this is a satisfactory answer, Your Honor, but the most I can say is that the as-applied nature of a challenge might go to the remedy. The legal analysis still focuses on the classification and the justification for the classification. And once we're talking about individuals, we're not talking about a classification anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't seem like much of an as-applied challenge, right? You have to prove the exact same things you do in a facial challenge.
Kagan is starting to come along. Kagan is the most reasonable of the liberal judges. She's easily the most intelligent one. I'm sure. I have a feeling that Ketanji Brown Jackson has no idea what they're talking about. That's my gut is she has no clue what the nature of the conversation. You understand this conversation based on my explanation. I'm confident you understand this discussion that Kagan is having with Hurst far better than Ketanji Brown Jackson still does.
But don't
KBJ, you should watch. Just watch. I'll help you out, kid.
Because you only get relief as to you. So that's not a true as-applied challenge.
And I'm having trouble coming up with what it could look like because it will always be possible to carve the class down further, right? I mean, so if they say that their class, that their subclass, I guess, subclass of males is males who identify as transgender, then we would come back and say, well, only something like 10% of males who identify as transgender take the testosterone suppression. And then they might say, well, okay, no, the class is just the males who take the testosterone suppression. And then we might come back and say, well, according to the record, according to their own expert, of males who take testosterone suppression, only 1/4 of them are able to achieve the appropriate, able to achieve ordinary levels of testosterone for women. And the other 3/4 would still have an advantage, and therefore we'd be justified 75%, pretty good fit in intermediate scrutiny, and we'd be justified with the law. But then they can just change the class again. They can say, aha, no, our class is males who identify as transgender, who suppress their testosterone, and who suppress their testosterone successfully and are able to get it down to where they don't have a competitive advantage.
This guy's great. He's a great lawyer, this guy. This is great. To come up with this off the cuff like this guy is so well prepped, intelligent, articulate. I am really impressed with Alan Hurst.
And at that point, we can say, if you can define the class so precisely, you're going to force the state to define the class that precisely. It's going to be enormously burdensome for everyone, and the state can never win, because whenever the state points to the fit in the statute, they just redefine their class as only the people who are outside the fit.
Thank you.
It's a great answer. I'll tell you, I think he might have just won Kagan over with that. That's a great answer.
Justice Gorsuch?
He's like, you're just going to keep changing the class. Now you're saying it's transgender men. But then after we say, okay, but, we got to keep transgender men out because too many of them are, have too high levels of testosterone. You'll change the class. Say, only transgender men. It's unfair to the transgender men who are all who have low levels of testosterone. He's like, they're going to just keep changing the class on us. This is a great response from Alan Hurst. At first, he's like, I don't know, what you come up with some hypothetical, what if we have an as applied here? And then he came up with the perfect answer to it. That's the problem with it. It's unwieldy.
Justice Kavanaugh?
To follow up on something you were talking about, Justice Sotomayor, would your constitutional position be different if the law explicitly stated that transgender women and girls cannot participate in women's and girls' sports?
Who cares? It doesn't say that. Why are you asking me this, Kavanaugh? You're trying to have a general rule? Or he's telling us that as long, or is he going to say as long as you don't use the word transgender, you're okay? Is that where Kavanaugh's supposed to say this?
My answer to that depends on what's in the rest of the law. So I would refer back to Skermetti and say it's not a magic words test. The mere presence of the word transgender in the statute is not enough to make it a transgender-based classification.
What would make it?
If the law, either expressly or through its effect, let all males except males who identify as transgender participate in female sports, but made it so that somebody's ability to play in female sports depended on transgender identity.
Assume that the law does not allow males to play in women's and girls' sports.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you asking? This is such a ridiculous question. Gosh, I don't understand. Fix it simply. Add three or third category of trans division. Let them fight for Title IX inclusion. I don't think you can field a hockey team with them, much less a whole league.
And then explicitly says, in separate provision, transgender women and girls, biological males who identify as female, cannot play in women's and girls' sports.
And by the way, that would not satisfy the trans, because the trans want to be recognized as women. That's part of why they do this. They'd be like, no, we are full women. We're full women. That would not satisfy them. That's appeasing them in a way. I understand why you're saying this, but I'm saying is that's appeasing them in a way that they're just gonna be like, okay, we'll take this victory for today, but it's not enough. They're gonna want more. They'll be back anyway.
Would your constitutional position be any different in that situation?
No, Your Honor, I think that's Skermetti. I think that would be a reference to transgender identity, but the law's application would never turn on transgender identity, so it wouldn't be a transgender status.
Even if it says transgender?
The word transgender in the statute might be relevant to a pretext analysis, but it wouldn't be relevant to the facial classification if that word did not change how that statute applied in practice.
How many states allow biological males who identify as females, transgender women and girls, to play in women's and girls' sports?
Statutorily, I'm aware of 27 states that take our side and do not permit that, and 23 states that take the other side and do permit it.
In those states who do allow it, is your position that they are violating the Constitution, the Equal Protection Clause rights of biological girls and women by allowing that? Or do you say that's up to each state to decide, and that the Constitution gives discretion to the state whether to allow it or not to allow it?
That's a really interesting question. Is it unconstitutional to allow trans people into a trans woman to compete against men, that it's a Title IX violation? It's an interesting question.
I have not yet been persuaded by a constitutional theory that would let us use the Equal Protection Clause to impose our policy on other states in this matter.
Okay. Justice Barrett?
I have some questions about the implications of your theory. So how would your theory play out if we're talking about 6-year-olds, where there's no difference between boys and girls in terms of athletic ability, testosterone levels, et cetera? Could you have sex-separated teams then? Or sorry, sex-separated teams by biological sex and not allow trans girls on the...
Certainly, Your Honor. First,
what the hell is a 6-year-old trans girl? What the hell is that? What is that? You're talking a God help us. God help us. God help us. You're asking a question about a 6-year-old trans girl. How the hell could a 6-year-old be someone explain to me? I don't understand this. How it is that before a person understands what sex is, before a person has popped a boner or should know anything about this, how the hell is someone actually trans at that age? What was that even? How sick and twisted a society we become that a Supreme Court justice is speculating about a 6-year-old trans girl. A freaking Supreme Court justice just asked a question, not ironically, about a 6-year-old trans girl. This is serious. What the hell's wrong with you? 6-year-old, what makes a 6-year-old trans? I don't care if it's a boy who likes to walk around in his mother's freaking high heels and skirts. That's still not a trans girl. These people are sick. That's the right side of the aisle. Justice Barrett. Oh, she's one of the right side of the aisle. What a terrible, terrible, terrible selection by Trump. God, 6-year-old trans girl.
I'd like to explain how the statute applies to that situation so I can put my answer in context. There are no 6-year-olds in the state to whom the statute applies because there are no school-sponsored.
That's why it was a hypothetical.
That's why it was a hypothetical? What about the fact that there's no such thing as a freaking 6-year-old trans girl? That would make it a hypothetical too. Aggravating. Oh my God. How embarrassing. This is a great Christian woman here, Amy Coney Barrett. Humiliating.
Okay, right.
She's yours. She's not mine. This one's not me. I'll swallow Kagan. This one's on you guys.
Yes.
If we're keeping score. Not that we are, but if we were, this one's on you. This one's not on me. Sotomayor is yours too. And KBJ. I'll take Kagan. And not proudly. Not proudly. It's very weird. There's only one Jewish member of the bench.
Like it would be the normal intermediate scrutiny analysis. And are we saying it applies only to 6-year-olds or to everybody across the board?
Well, I'm just trying to give you yours is driven by testosterone levels and differences in athletic capability. So I'm asking you, what if you try to take that out of the equation and you're just drawing the line based on biological sex and saying,
what if there's a 2-month-old trans girl? What about that? What about that scenario? Would you allow them to play? And would you say that's okay to ban them too? This retardo question.
That trans girls can't be on the girls' team in an age group that's prepubescent.
Good night, Jovi.
The record in this case does not support the notion that males lack an athletic advantage at 6 years old. That's about as early as the science goes from what's in the record.
I want to clear this up. I was amused by how powerful she was in dealing with the Senate. But she's disaster. And to the extent I express support for her, which is possible, it's possible. I remember I wanted to get her to get through. Certainly better than having Biden appoint someone. As far as her being a nomination in the first place, gosh. I didn't know anything about her. I didn't done any, all I knew is how well she was able to answer questions in the Senate.
And even at that age, males have about a 5% athletic advantage over girls.
Thank you, Hard
in
News
most
Network.
situations. Now, if this is not a level of competition where anybody cares about that, The simple solution is the solution you see in most places, which is you have co-ed sports. You don't divide the teams based on sex, and everybody can play. And Idaho's law does nothing to interfere with that.
And remind me whether Idaho's law, and I guess your answer made me think of this, and I guess this goes to the question of whether the law discriminates on the basis of trans status. Is it true that
I'm 5 and 2-year-old sons all like pink, but they like being boys? Yeah. Yeah. It's like
biological girls, trans boys can play on boys' teams?
Anyone can play on boys' teams, Your Honor.
Anyone can play on boys' teams. Okay. And to this point about medical uncertainty and scientific uncertainty, you were talking about what advantages you might have even that are apart from testosterone levels.
Mm-hmm.
Your friends on the other side say that, listen, that science is uncertain, and so we need more factual development. It's not really clear how much of an athletic advantage boys and men have if their testosterone levels are below a certain point. How does that play out? Tell me why we don't need more fact-finding, or what is the state's burden in showing what the state of scientific certainty is? Do we have to defer to the state? Presumably at some point, if deference is due, the state would have too little scientific evidence to really get that deference. Tell me how to think about that.
The first question would be, are we applying intermediate scrutiny? And we argue that the court shouldn't. But leaving that aside, if the court is applying intermediate scrutiny, then we'd say it's Turner Broadcasting that says the legislature, First Amendment case, applied intermediate scrutiny and said under intermediate scrutiny, the legislature has to draw reasonable inferences from substantial evidence. It does not need to act only on scientific consensus, which is what the district court in this case assumed incorrectly.
Thank you.
Justice Jackson?
So I guess I'm going back to your discussion with Justice Kagan. I'm not sure I understand.
I just want to point out, I told you she didn't understand the dialogue between Kagan and I never watched this before. I was like, there's no way in hell she understood that. There's no way in hell she understood that, because I've heard her speak. She did not understand that. So I think it's hilarious that the first words is that whole thing you had, Kagan. I'm not sure I understand
Why you're characterizing the as applied challenge in practice as the individual coming back and proposing a different classification, as though we're doing an analysis of the classification in the way that you suggest. I thought that the state has a classification. The
problem is you tried thinking. That's where we start with the words I thought. That's where we have a problem.
That is its general rule. No individuals who identify as female but were sex at birth male can play in women's sports. And that the individual then is merely seeking an exception based on their individual capacity, because the state's general rule is based on fairness.
You didn't understand anything.
And medical science and all.
No, I called it. You didn't understand anything about this.
Of these things. Do I have this, like, they're not proposing an alternative class necessarily. They are just saying that I should be accepted from that general rule on.
By the way, another part to his lawyering, which I'm really impressed with, is that he's able to refer to the petitioner, Hecox, actually it's the respondent here, Hecox, as her, which I would struggle with mightily. And B, that he has the patience to deal with KBJ.
This basis.
We agree that an exception is what they are seeking, Your Honor. And it's an exception based on transgender status, again.
But that's the way the rule used to work, right? I just want to be clear about what we're talking about here.
I told you, no clue. You have no clue. Let's try. Maybe he should have said, hey, why don't you just check out Good Lawgic later, and he'll walk you through it, huh?
Sure.
I understood that this law originally was exactly that. That you basically said no transgender women in girl sports, but we'll look at your evidence and look at your circumstances.
What's the rationale behind having a women's division at all? Biological differences. Why does that change if the person identifies differently? I don't know. No one knows. Because they think they're girls. it's about physical advantage, no blacks group. That's funny.
Circumstances and decide whether or not you individually can be included.
So
is that what used to happen?
As a matter of Idaho law, there was no law whatsoever before this.
Is that what was happening on the ground in Idaho law?
That's what NCAA policy permitted from 2010 to 2022. Before 2010, the NCAA policy matched ours. Since 2025, the NCAA policy has matched ours.
Okay. But what I'm asking is if that's the ask here, not that all transgender women be allowed, but that this particular plaintiff be allowed based on their circumstances, why is that so not administrable or proposing a different classification that we're not going to be able to sustain? I don't understand.
So first as to administrability, Your Honor, making sure that a transgender athlete does not have an unfair advantage would require ongoing testosterone monitoring because circulating testosterone can fluctuate. That is invasive. That is intrusive.
No, that's the burden of the person. The person who wants to play has to demonstrate to you, to whatever degree of scientific certainty, that they don't have a competitive advantage. Why?
And you're making it strict scrutiny now that we have to try and tailor the rule based on. Now you're trying to change our rule to make it more narrowly tailored as possible. That's a strict scrutiny thing.
Why would you not allow that? I guess I don't understand.
The second answer is that
You heard his exhaustion with this woman. God, why do I have to answer questions from this incompetent bozo?
Is that there's nothing in that argument that limits itself to transgender identifying athletes. If this athlete doesn't have an advantage over women and therefore can compete safely, then there are other athletes that could say for different reasons that they don't have an unfair advantage and therefore they could compete safely.
Yes,
and
I understand that. And there are legal arguments. Let me ask you something about the classification. I guess I'm struggling to understand how you can say that this law doesn't classify on the basis of transgender status. The law expressly aims to ensure that transgender women can't play on women's sports teams. So why is that not a classification on the basis of transgender status?
I'd apply Skermetti again. The question is whether the application of the law turns on transgender status, and it doesn't. It turns on sex. The legislature did not want to exclude transgender people from sports. It wanted to keep women's sports women only and exclude males from women's sports.
No, I understand. But with respect to two individuals, a cis woman and a trans woman, who both want to play on a team that reflects their gender identity, this law operates differently based on their sex, right?
There's no such thing as a trans woman.
The law does operate differently based on their sex, as Your Honor just said. It does not operate differently based on their transgender identity.
But it treats transgender women different than
because they're not biological women. This is why when they asked you this question, what is a woman? You're like, I don't know what a woman is. This is exactly why. Because of this dialogue right here, this is why you were not an appropriate selection for the Supreme Court. This is it right here. Right here. We're all seeing it. We're all seeing it right here at this moment. And she's transgender women differently. Oh, all of a sudden you think you know what a woman is now. All of a sudden, oh, look at this. Oh, Ketanji Brown Jackson finally understands what a woman is. Look at that. Oh, who would have thought such a thing is possible? Oh, wow. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? No one would believe it.
Provide a definition for the word woman.
This was her at her confirmation. This is her at her confirmation.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in this context.
So
I'm not a biologist.
Yeah, I'm not a biologist. But all of a sudden now you think you're a biologist now, don't you? You're all figuring it out now, aren't you, honey? Yeah, all of a sudden it's trans women with different than cis women. All of a sudden you got all these things figured out. You got all your theories and philosophies. That the ridiculous joke of an answer you tried turning into a joke, which was the most awkward cringe moment, perhaps in any Supreme Court justice confirmation hearing in American history, and playing right here, right now, you're watching it. Disgusting. Just all of a sudden she's waking up. Oh, what is treating transgender women different than cis women?
Cis women, doesn't it?
It has a disparate impact because men who identify as transgender have a different reason for wanting to play women's sports than women, than biological females do, right? But if that were enough, then Skermetti would have come out a different way. Gaduldig would have come out a different way. Other cases would have gone a different way. I'm blanking on the other ones.
All right, finally, let me just ask you about mootness, because it's a little odd, I think, that a defendant would not want a case dismissed. Ordinarily, the defendant is the one who's claiming mootness because they've been sued. So this plaintiff has brought a claim against you, and the claim relates to your policy about college sports. And as I understand, the plaintiff is about to graduate. So wouldn't we have a mootness problem potentially notwithstanding any representations that the plaintiff made?
I don't think so, Your Honor. I'd look to Camreta as the case that tells us the best case for telling us how we analyze mootness in this situation. It's, does the petitioner still have an interest in continuing the litigation?
Only for a few more months. What if this decision doesn't come out until June and she graduates in May?
It's my understanding at this point, I defer to my friends here, it's my understanding at this point that May graduation is not possible.
For this individual?
For this individual, that's correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Mr. Mupan?
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please.
All right, so we're going to stop here. Very good attorney. Really well done. And folks are expecting, look, if when the petitioner is saying, oh my God, get me out of this case, that's a really good sign. It's a really good sign. Did she call her him? That's funny. I missed that. How many trans men and women are for this? I don't know. I would give anything to have her say, before we go, I want to say, let's make sure we're on the same page. Can you define the term woman for me? That would be great. All right, so I had here a question. I don't know how I remembered it, but thank God I did. Well, I know why I remembered it, because you could thank this super chat here. This super chat here from Lauren Clemens, when she said, my 955 and 2-year-old sons all like pink, but they like being boys. So I was about to say, I like pink too. I really like pink. And I was referring to this pink super chat. I'm very much a boy. I'm a real boy. So, and that called to attention this this request that we have a prayer for Scott Adams at the end of the show. And in fact, in order to give this gravity that it merits, I'm actually going to use this as my closeout. So let me do a quick check, make sure I didn't miss any chats when I'm looking at this. Make sure that I'm good in the ghetto. I didn't miss anything. I think I'm probably good there. Ghetto's been quiet for a little while, other than a raid from Hard News Network. Welcome all your Hard News people. And so I guess I'll say a few words and then give like a moment of silence and then say goodnight. All right. So we all hope and pray that God looks favorably upon Scott Adams and the soul of Scott Adams and accepts him into heaven. And looks favorably upon him for all the remarkable work and influence he had on people, influence he had in changing their lives for the better, for the pure heart that he routinely displayed, and take into account the depths to which he was able to move his fellow man into trying to improve themselves, to credit him for all of their work that are a flow as and a result that result from his inspiring me and countless other people to be better people and to continue attributing more and more merit to his soul as those works manifest. Good night and Godspeed.